Welcome everybody. We're back inside the square circle, but this one's a good one. This is about the golden era of wrestling, the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, the early 90s, and I'm here with the body star man himself, Superstar Xavier Mykeals.
How's it going?
How you doing?
Fantastic, Kev, man. I missed you. I had such a good time with that interview we did a few weeks ago that we started talking, and we actually have a lot in common when it comes to what we grew up liking and wrestling in general.
Right. So we were before we did this video, we were actually watching old matches last night. Like I watched the Bruno San Martino Superstar Billy Graham title match, WWE title match, WWF title match at Madison Square Garden. I think you said you watched what match did you watch last night?
I watched old championship wrestling from Florida, so it was a lot of their TV tapings. And yeah, I'll let you talk about that San Martino match first, but I actually took video and shared it with some guys that I'm helping train because the selling, Kev, the selling in this 1976 match is amazing.
I went back and I watched it earlier, and you're damn scary. This match, yeah, well, what he's saying, guys, if you ever wanted to get into this business, this match in particular has a lot of great selling points. It tells a story in the ring.
And that's the whole point. Before we go any further, that we'll touch on the current age of wrestling, but the whole point is to tell a story because if you just want to see two guys fight, MMA is readily available. There's no story, I guess there's like that weigh-in drama, you know.
Yeah.
But the stories from especially the 70s and 80s are magic to me.
And what's great is that the guys that were small, like Ivan Plutsky, who was like 5'11", 5'10", but he was like a big 235, 40-pound guy. Bruno San Martino only stood like 5'11", and he was like 240 pounds. And you're talking about smaller guys now who are like 5'11" and $185, or maybe 200 pounds. And every character in from the 60s and the 70s and the 80s were like larger than life, in my opinion.
Oh, definitely. So just to ask you about that match, what did you dig about that San Martino Superstar match?
Well, what was great about it was the fact that Bruno San Martino, a lot of people know, holds the longest record of any WWE champion with the longest reign. But what was great about it was the fact that him and Superstar Billy Graham were having a feud during that time. Like, he took the belt from Bruno. Bruno took it back from him. The one thing I liked about the match was the psychology. And another thing that's important for wrestling is the announcing. When you hear an announcer explain what's going on in the match, that is probably one of the most important things in wrestling, period. And back then, Vince McMahon, that we know now, Vince McMahon Jr., but Vince McMahon that owns WWE now, was the commentator in this match. And he actually wasn't that bad of a commentator. I actually thought he did pretty well. The one thing I loved about this match was the fact that it was physicality. It was like two big brute guys. And you look at Superstar Billy Graham, and he's like 6'5", 6'6", and that blonde hair and the tie-dye. It's one people that Hulk Hogan looked up to. And Superstar Billy Graham was also popular in the Florida region, Florida Championship Wrestling. But so you have Bruno San Martino, this Italian, all hairy, looking like Chewbacca. But what's great about them though is the fact that they were like two big horns. They both had the same finisher, which was like the bear hug. It was so standard back in the 70s, and submission holds were very standard back then. But I think the fact is that it was in Madison Square Garden. I think if any wrestler had a chance to wrestle at Madison Square Garden, me included, I'd be down for it.
Oh, definitely.
That place is like the holier, story here. Mel took me to New York to visit some of her family, and we walked past Madison Square Garden. It looks small outside, but inside that place, huge.
Oh, I agree with you. I went there for a show once, and the air smells different when you walk in there.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
You were outside of it. You weren't inside.
Yeah, it smell it. You can actually smell it outside. outside had a different smell to it. It just everything was just magical about Madison Square Garden. There's so many great memories there. And I think that that's one thing about the match I also liked was the fact that they were, their punches were connected better. The punches were better. The moves were better. The flow wasn't going 500 miles an hour like we see now with some of those guys who wants to put everything in at one point. And the one thing we talked about off air before we came on here is the most important thing is they never kicked out of the finishers.
No.
They sold them. Point blank. When Carrie Von Erich would put you in that claw, you're done. That's how it was. So explain to everybody what happened in your the match that you watched. Like
so the match I watched was it was Championship Wrestling from Florida, 1976. So the build up to this match was that one of the participants was the Missouri Mauler. So the Missouri Mauler had just storyline wise put Dusty Rhodes out because there was a bounty from Terry Funk. Excuse me one moment. Can you guys? Can you fill? I know we're live, but something just happened off screen that I have to go grab.
Go ahead. Yeah, but what he's talking about is that the story to this was that the guy put a bounty, Terry Funk put a down bounty on Dusty Rhodes, and that's when the Missouri Mauler comes in and into play. But yeah, going back to that Bruno match for a minute, it was I think that one was 1976 too. Okay, he's back now.
I apologize. That's what happens when you have company and you're trying to do a live broadcast. But
it's okay.
So no, the Missouri Mauler was facing this guy named Bill Dremel. He was just an enhancement talent. And the entire match, the Mauler was controlling the match and working on the arm. And oh my goodness. It was amazing because that whole match, Dremel sold the arm. And that's in fact how he lost the match. He didn't even use his right arm. You will never see that in nowadays wrestling.
Nope. I like what Ryan said here. He said that it's called a finisher for a reason. Absolutely.
Well, yeah, and back then the finishers were protected. So if one guy did a move, another guy typically in that territory would not do a move.
I don't know if you've seen this documentary or not, but I watched the one on HBO about Andre the Giant. And one thing I loved about hearing about Andre and his story is being a 7'4", 400-pound guy back then. He let some of the guys do some offense on him. A lot of people don't know this, but when he was smaller in weight, Harley Race actually body slammed him.
Oh yeah, because I actually watched something similar, and so if you were booking Andre, and if it was one of his last nights in the territory, as long as it wasn't New York, because New York was his main territory.
Yep.
As long as it wasn't New York, you could guarantee that Andre was going to put over who the main attraction was. You know what I mean? Because he was leaving, and that guy was staying. That's the big point. He'd put over the guy that was staying, so that guy had drawing power for the next run.
And the one thing great about him too is the fact that for a 7'4", 400-pound guy back then, he moved pretty crisp for a real big guy. And I tell any big guy wrestler, and I used to know a guy who was wrestling here in the Indies, and I helped out in the ring, Justin. He was a really big guy, and I told him, look, watch some of Andre's matches. Go back and watch them. Watch some of these watch some of these big guys work. Watch Haystacks Calhoun. Watch some of these guys. See what they do. Bruiser Brody, watch them, and you will learn a lot from it. And he went back and he watched it. He was like, man, I learned so much just watching that than I did in training. And I'm like, there you go.
Yeah, and that's kind of what we talked about when you interviewed me at the end of December is essentially in training, you're learning ways to not hurt yourself and others. The main way you learn the art of this business is by other guys. And that's what happened a lot in the 70s and 80s is they learned their craft but on the road, traveling.
And back then they would party. And by the way, back in the wrestling days, those days, whatever happens behind the scenes stayed behind the scenes.
Oh, yeah. There is, I think it's on YouTube. There is there's footage of some cameraman walking up to the curtain after Andre the Giant goes through it. And, you know, Andre pats, Christ, I think it's Dick the Bruiser on the back.
Mm-hmm.
But then everybody sees the cameraman and Andre freaks out.
Get out!
Yeah, you've seen it. He freaked out.
Yeah. I think the first time I ever got introduced to the old style of wrestling was my dad took me to a Memphis wrestling show, and I got to see the Jerry Lawler, you know, Andy Kaufman stuff. And seeing that I was intrigued by it. I'm like, man, so this dude's over here beating up women, and there's Jerry Lawler. Then you hear Jerry Lawler is one of the most dirtiest wrestlers back in the day. And then you see Andy Kaufman in the ring, and I'm just like, when he did that power driver to him, I thought he killed him. That's how bad it was. Like, did he just kill that kid? He just killed that dude.
See, I'm actually envious of you over that, because that happened before WrestleMania 1.
Mm-hmm.
And my opinion is that is what catalyzed wrestling. You have an established Hollywood actor, you know what I mean, who's mixing it up with professional wrestlers, but the actor knows the business. You know what I mean? So he's putting the wrestlers over like it's real.
Yep.
God, I envy you. I wish I could have seen that.
And what's cool, too, is that they went on the David Letterman show and made it even more like, he's like, hey, punch me in the face. I want you to hit me for real. And just, you know, it was just that incident on David Letterman also catapulted what they were doing. And then we had WrestleMania 1, and I feel like WWE kind of saw that and kind of ran with it. Once they saw that, they're like, oh, okay. That's sports entertainment. But back in the day, wrestling wasn't sports entertainment. Wrestling was considered a sport at that point. You know, it was. I used to remember watching ESPN. They would have some of the old AWA matches on ESPN, and the one thing too about these wrestling companies is the great thing about it was you had, like, on this map I'm looking at, you had up here you had Stampede Wrestling with Stu Hart. Once Vince bought Stampede Wrestling, once he bought that, look at the talent he got. He got Bret Hart. He got Dynamite Kid from it. And
Dynamite Davey Boy too, right?
Dynamite, what's that?
Didn't he get Davey Boy from the Stampede as well?
Mm-hmm. Yep. And you just got, like, two of the greatest, like, tag teams of all time. And, you know, Dynamite Kid, you know, who's a smaller guy as well, but he was brute like Chris Benoit's body. Yes, I mentioned Benoit, people.
Yeah, let's just add an amendum right now, Big Kev, for anybody watching. If we bring up a wrestler who may have some kind of checkered thing, it's not that we're condoning that checkered thing. We're just condoning the fact they were at one time a really good wrestler.
Right. So here in this maps, the Mid-Atlantic was the Jim Crockett Promotions, which turned into NWA and WCW. You know, then you had the big time wrestling. You had WWA, AWA by the Gagnes. You know the Gagne family.
Yes, I do.
And Memphis was run by Jeff Jarrett, Jeff Jarrett's dad.
Yep. So
you had a lot of those great, you know, and then let's see, in the comment section, the Prodigal Hill says he was a WCCW guy, which he's from Texas. So they had a real good, you know, is it just me, or did the Freebirds bring out that charisma more than anybody?
Dude, I was just watching something. Besides the Von Erichs, the Freebirds were the highest selling tickets in Texas.
Yes.
That's amazing.
They were all wrestling at the Sportatorium. And I know the Sportatorium's like this big thing in Texas. I know Undertaker talked about it. Stone Cold's talked about it. That was the big all be all to go to.
Right. No, and a lot of that footage, like, it's just amazing, like, how much people got into it in WCCW, you know? Like, I love those rabid fans, especially that cage match with Carrie Von Erich and Michael P.S. Hayes is the special, like, gatekeeper.
Oh, yes.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, you know, what's cool, too, is I remember doing a video with the prodigal heel on this, and he thought that WWE kind of stole the Attitude Era idea from WCCW. If you think about it in a little bit, because WCCW was doing a lot of they were doing some pretty dangerous stuff, and I think the violence was kind of coming from there.
Well, yeah, because I mean, they wanted the realism of it. Fritz wanted everything to look crisp, to look real. So, yeah, a lot of those guys were legit badasses.
And I don't know if any of y'all seen the podcast with Undertaker and Austin. Undertaker, as a green guy, made a mistake with Bruiser Brody, and he paid the price for it. And that's one thing I loved about wrestling back then too. Is if you made a mistake or something like that, be sure that you're going to get tattooed back. And those wrestlers did not take any bullshit. There was locker room leaders. The one thing too, the wrestler I felt like that came out and made this, that pretty much made Ric Flair and made Hulk Hogan and all that, I believe was Gorgeous George.
Oh God, yeah.
Gorgeous George was like this guy, was flamboyant. He was, very great in the ring, very good on the mic, and then you can say the Nature Boy Buddy Rogers too. You can throw him in there as well. But when I saw him, I was like, that is cool. I mean,
well, Gorgeous George, that's a awesome story if you ever read a biography about him. But that was the first boom of wrestling, was the 50s when television, took off and started taking everything over. And Gorgeous George, quickly learned that if you're flamboyant and you're a bad guy, you can make a lot of money. And, that influenced all, Buddy Rogers, that influenced everybody else. It was like a domino effect.
He doesn't get enough credit. And, Luthez, the wrestler Luthez, everybody knows Austin did the famous Luthez press. That's where it was from. That was his finisher. And back then, Luthez used to pin people with that finisher, with the Luthez press. And
see, and going back and watching all these old things, and I think this is why I'm such a fan of what we consider the golden age, the 60s through the 90s, is it wasn't necessarily always a finishing maneuver that pinned somebody. It could have been a roll-up. You never knew where it was going to come from.
Yep. And I like the fact, too, that it was also more submissions. There were more, the wrestlers told a story in the ring. They didn't sit there and be hear the crowd go, and then they fight out of it. No, they would actually check the arm, make sure everything's fine, and then they would battle out of it. There was a lot more. I felt like there was a lot more textbook, a lot more technical wrestling. I felt like back then than we got now, because now it's just hey, Circus Soleil, let's do 500 flips, and as you said, the Canadian Destroyer.
Dude, Dustin Rhodes, Goldust did a Canadian Destroyer on AEW. It was amazing. I couldn't believe a guy that big. What is a guy that big? Now, don't get me wrong. Goldust, Dustin Rhodes is one of my favorites.
Yeah.
But I don't know why he needed to do that.
So there's a question. I can let you answer this one. How do you think CM Punk would have did in the locker room with Bruiser Brody and the Freebirds?
Gotten his ass kicked.
Especially with Brody. Yeah.
To be honest, because I've never been in a locker room with CM Punk, but I've read a lot of stuff, and you can just tell by his demeanor on screen that he's a backstage politician. And those guys wouldn't have had any of that. You know what I mean? You would, especially with Brody. Brody, if you actually watch a lot of his shoot stuff, he was a pretty pardon my language, pretty freaking intelligent guy. But he just did not tolerate BS.
Another guy I heard was oh yeah, watch the fucking mouth. Let's watch the fucking. Oh, yeah.
I was telling him, I'm like, you need to watch your fucking mouth. What are you talking about?
No, but there's also too another guy in wrestling that was a badass back then, and I've read about, didn't know it was, but Ming, who played Haku, I heard was a legit badass backstage. You didn't fuck with him. And
dude, some of those stories about Haku out at the bar are awesome. Biting people's ears off and You know, because he didn't tolerate shit. He perpetrated kayfabe to the nth degree.
Yep, super kicks are done way too damn much. I'm sorry. I mean, when you see like the Young Bucks doing super kick after super kick after super kick after super kick, and Kevin Owens is doing a super kick, and Seth Rollins is doing a super kick, it was cool when Shawn did it.
Well, yeah, because Shawn added a little panache to it. Because actually, the first person to do it was Gentleman Chris Adams.
Right.
But Shawn added the whole stomping in the corner thing in the theatrics. But yeah, I'm not a Young Bucks fan. And I know we take a lot of heat for this, you and me, Kev, but I just think that it's too much flippy floppy and not enough getting people involved.
I didn't know this one here. Paul says, Ryan, actually, excuse me, says Haku was one of the very few wrestlers that Andre feared. And that is actually true.
Oh, yeah. I mean, him and the Barbarian. I've heard a lot of stories about him and the Barbarian being two of the toughest bastards that ever walked.
I mean, you know what's cool too is when you hear about stories about them, about some of their nightlife and their story. The one thing that a lot of wrestlers back then don't get a lot of credit for was that they would wrestle 2 shows a night. They would go to Boston earlier in the day, and then at night they'd go to Madison Square Garden.
Oh, hell yeah!
And they would have to wrestle twice, and I mean that's the reason why you see guys like Hogan who's got like 10 or 12 back surgeries and hip replacements. You can't see out of this eye or here, and you see. Like Dynamite Kid was in a wheelchair before he passed away. I mean, this is the reason why. A lot of people don't understand that. Wrestling also had drugs and rock and roll. There was a lot of drugs back then.
Well, you know, and I experienced a little bit of that lifestyle when I was in radio. I mean, a lot of it was out of necessity. It's going to sound weird to say drug use is out of necessity, but think about this. They're wrestling 2 shows and they're driving. So they're going to need something to keep them awake. You know what I mean? Cocaine. Cocaine's the easiest thing to take to keep you awake. But then you're going to need something to go to sleep, Xanax. And then there's the drinking, there's the weed, you know, it's just, and then you get so accustomed to it, it's just a lifestyle.
Let's see what he said here. Harley Race, Arn Anderson, and Rick Steiner would have eaten those guys alive.
Especially Harley Race. I've heard stories about how Harley Race could knock anybody out with one punch.
I have a friend who lives in Missouri, and her brother went to Harley Race's camp, and they said that Harley Race, even before he passed away, was a mean old bastard. So, I mean, I was sitting there thinking, it would have been an honor for me to go into like some camp like Killer Kowalski's or Harley Race's and just. I'd be like, dude, I am here to learn. I am at your feet.
Yeah, I mean, wouldn't that be amazing? Because, like, it's kind of funny. You hear stories like Kevin Nash tells a story where he'd always see Harley Race right before a match with a cig in his mouth, you know, and an ash like that long. Like, and I told that cocksucker that I would not job to that guy.
Now, the one story, too, that I love is Hogan told it on the Andre's biography. Andre did not like when you wore baby oil.
No, and that's why he hated Macho Man.
Yeah, and he said, get out, no baby oil. Then during the match, he'd go, this is for you, Liz. This hard. I'm sitting there thinking, man, I would do everything in my power to not piss Andre off. That would be my goal in this, is to not piss Andre off. I mean, Hogan said back in the day in the 80s or the late 70s that anytime he had to wrestle Andre, he would stop the car and throw up. Because he's like, he's like, man, I don't want to wrestle this dude.
Well, if you think about it, I mean, he's a legit giant. So if he wants to just sit down, how are you going to move him? I don't care how strong you are. You know what I mean?
I mean, I've seen some stuff with Andre that's really great. And, you know, a wrestler that doesn't get a lot of credit. I know he's crazy now, but Bob Backlund was a good wrestler back then. And he, you know, he has some matches there with Superstar Billy Graham, and he had to help. The one thing I loved about the old WWF title, it was green, and it used to have the plates of all the champions that were champions. And then, when Hogan won it, they changed the belt around, obviously. But
Yeah, they changed it like 3 or 4 times before we got the Winged Eagle.
that Winged Eagle was beautiful.
That is my championship belt. That is still always going to be the belt that I hold the most dear. Either that or Big Gold. You know what I mean? Like the one that Flair made famous.
The one belt that I love that I'm glad NWA Power has brought back is the old NWA Championship.
Yes.
That belt is beautiful. And those are like 3 belts. If I had a collection, I would want all 3 of them on the wall.
Speaking of all this old stuff, I have a question for anybody who's like out there listening right now for this live chat. What is your earliest memory of professional wrestling that got you hooked? That's a good question because we're talking about all this old days stuff. And like I told you in my interview, it was the original Twin Magic, that Saturday night's main event with the Hebner twins. But then, I couldn't, at first my parents wouldn't get me the pay-per-view, so I had to watch all the stuff on ESPN Classic, which is, where I saw all this old stuff. And I started just absolutely loving guys like Jackie Fargo. You know what I mean? You know who Jackie Fargo is from the Memphis territory?
Oh, yes. I even know who, I know Bill Dundee. I know some of y'all might know Bill Dundee, but his son was actually in the tag team PG-13. A lot of people didn't know that, but
I'm glad you brought up Bill Dundee because I actually made a note when we were doing research for this show. So Bill Dundee and Jerry Lawler had a famous feud. All right. Mm-hmm. But before that, in 1979, they were a tag team. So if anybody wants to see the original hardcore match, it's called the Concession Stand Brawl. It's Bill Dundee, Jerry Lawler against the Blonde Bombers. And the Blonde Bombers were Wayne Ferris and I can't remember his real name, but it was Moondog Spot. And Wayne Ferris eventually went on to become the Honky Tonk Man,
who also happens to be Jerry Lawler's cousin.
Right. The reason why that match was so big at the time, it was the first time anybody's seen something like that. They wrestled from the ring to the concession stand, and then I think it was Bill Dundee picked up a big jar of glass pickles and shattered it over Moondog Spot's head.
We can also talk about, too, the famous, this match was a death match, and they had barbed wire around the ring, the Terry Funk Cactus Jack. But they had the little exploding stuff in the ring. I know AEW tried to recreate it, and they failed miserably. But you can't go back in matches like that. One of my fondest memories, another memory that I had was I was watching a clip of the Road Warriors when they were heels. They took the spike out of their thing and actually stabbed it in Dusty Rhodes' eye. And I thought that was like, whoa, all right, here we go.
That is actually the angle that dumbass Hannibal up in Canada was trying to recreate when he put that referee in the hospital.
Yeah.
Even though it was a gimmicked spike that they used against Dusty, he did not use a gimmicked spike.
Let's see. Procol Hill says, me and my grandma used to watch it, and I remember laughing when Missing Link would beat his head on the turnbuckle. Yeah.
Some of those guys used to legit scare me. Missing Link was one of them. Missing Link used to scare the shit out of me when I was growing up.
Michael says the first WrestleMania he got to watch and remember was seeing WrestleMania 10. He's been hooked since then, but my favorite that keeps me hooked is a Steamboat Savage from WrestleMania 3. And that's another one that I tell people they need to watch.
So Michael is a pretty awesome guy. I do know him in real life outside of this. But he brings up a valuable wrestler, Ricky Steamboat. So remember how earlier we were talking about how somebody was selling an injury the entire match?
Mm-hmm.
Ricky Steamboat, in my opinion, is the last wrestler that ever did that. If you go back and watch that WrestleMania 3 match, he sold every injury Macho Man gave him in that match to the point where he wouldn't use, like, when he tried to jump off the top rope, he'd limp. You know what I mean? He couldn't effectively jump off the top rope because Macho had done damage to his leg. Now, wrestlers nowadays will ignore that. It's like, oh, you worked on my leg. Okay, I'm all better.
And another thing they do, too, is that when they're working on the leg, and I've seen it in a women's match, too, they'll work on the leg, and then all of a sudden they'll switch to the back.
Right.
And it's like, that's one thing I do respect about Bret Hart is I thought Bret Hart was really good technical wise. If he's going for the sharpshooter, he's going for your leg. There's no
The
way
only
around it.
time I agree with you, the only time that you switch it up, so for instance, the finishing move I use, the Southern Cross, you kind of like bend somebody in a U shape. So I will work on both the knee and the back because when you apply the move, it looks like it's affecting those two spots. You know what I mean? But you're right. If somebody's finish is a move that's supposed to damage the knee, why work on the arm? You know what I mean? You're wasting valuable story time.
So Ryan says Saturday morning WWE wrestling on NBC around 10 a.m. after the cartoons were over. WrestleMania 3 is my first pay-per-view that I watched on VHS. I think my first pay-per-view was the Survivor Series that The Undertaker debuted.
Dude, that Survivor Series was that is my final chapter. So if you would bookend, like if a era of wrestling was a novel, Survivor Series 1990, in my opinion, is when the golden age of wrestling stopped. Because no offense to anybody out there, I think the Ultimate Warrior was the absolute worst champion WWE ever had. And, you know, previous in that year, Hogan had dropped the belt to Warrior at WrestleMania 6. So you kind of had an epilogue of Hogan, you know, like falling from grace, then getting his chest crushed by Earthquake. And then, what's that?
No, I didn't say nothing.
Oh. And then you had that epilogue of the debut of The Undertaker, which I thought he was going to be Eggman too. I thought he was going to jump out of the egg and we weren't going to get that stupid gobbledygooker.
Oh my gosh. That's when it really did die. And to be honest with you, that WrestleMania 6, I'm not afraid to admit this, but as a kid, I cried. Because that was
I did too.
Because that was the first time I saw Hulk Hogan ever lose clean. And I was expecting him to do his Nick. He did. And I was expecting him, but I wasn't expecting the Warrior to kick out of the leg drop. That's when the false finishes started then. Yeah, it's kind of like Hogan kicks out, does his usual Hulk up, and then he does for the leg drop and he misses. And then Warrior splashes him. And then Hogan does a little kick out at the end, which I thought was kind of funny. But Hogan was right. They should have turned Hogan heel then. If I was Hogan, I would have hit him with that belt right in the freaking head. I'd be like, you know what? I was the man here. Here you are doing this, and I'm going to hit you in the head now.
Could you imagine how different wrestling would be now if they would have turned Hogan at WrestleMania 6?
We could have saw Hollywood then.
Yeah.
Now, what's interesting too is let's see. Michael says that Warrior screwed Jake Roberts out of becoming champion if you watch the Dark Side of the Ring. Absolutely correct.
And any younger fans who are watching, and by younger I mean if your first memory of wrestling is the end of the Attitude to now, the end of the Attitude Era till now, Dark Side of the Ring is a great jumping on point if you want some knowledge about the golden age of wrestling.
I mean, there's also, I think a lot of people are agreeing with you in the comments that the Undertaker's debut was the end of the golden era.
Well, yeah, because then we got I shouldn't call it the neon era, but like that early 90s era was just like so it was even more cartoony than the 80s.
Now, what was interesting, the only thing I liked about the early 90s, the one stint they did, and I watched this on Saturday morning, was when they had Macho Man go in there against Jake Roberts, and Jake Roberts had that Cobra bite him.
Dude, that was traumatizing because on the original broadcast, they did not censor it.
No, no. And that we didn't know as fans that the Cobra was defanged. Nobody knew that. All we saw was just him grabbing the hold of Macho Man's arm and just doing that. And I think the one thing that traumatized me was when Warrior got locked in that casket. It was trying to get out of it, and then they open it up, and Warrior's knocked out, and they're trying to resuscitate him and everything. And I'm like,
yeah, that was a good storyline too. But you know, once again, Jim Hellwig didn't like that storyline, so they dropped it.
Undertaker did mention that. Let's see. Michael said he got behind that after the New Generation era. That's the one era that's.
So the only thing I can say about the New Generation era is the end of it was awesome because that's what led to the Attitude Era.
Right.
But Michael's right. Like that whole New Generation era, I mean, we had like a toilet plunger guy, TL Hopper, who was awesome in Smoky Mountain as Dirty White Boy.
Yeah. Yeah. We also had Duke the Dumpster Drosy.
Who, you know, he had a great look, but like really, like what kid is going to think a garbage man is cool? I'm not making fun of people who do that profession because that's a well-paying profession. You provide for your family. It's a necessity of a job. But what kid is going to be like, oh my God, I want to see the garbage man beat the Undertaker?
Now, Michael's right. We did get some good things in the New Generation era. The WrestleMania 10 ladder match with Shawn Michaels and Scott Hall was great. And the Iron Man match was good too between Brett and
Oh God, that's my favorite match of all time. That well, I shouldn't say that. It's a tie between WrestleMania 12 and WrestleMania 13. They're both Brett matches.
The Brett and Austin was one of my favorites. I mean, it was the turning of the tie. It was a turning of the Attitude Era. And that was the first time I saw fans actually switch. Like the switch of, I want to go heel. You're a heel, but now you're a face. You were a face, but now you're a heel.
But see, they didn't even try to do that because Austin still acted like a heel after that match. It's just the way they ended it, the fans got behind him because it's like, look at this MFer. He didn't give up. He's a tough bastard. He passed out from blood loss.
A lot of people don't give, now you were saying this in our interview, but a lot of people don't give credit, but Steve Austin was a good worker. Before that neck injury, he had one of the best suplexes that I've seen done. Like he would pick somebody up and it would scoop them, and it was just beautifully done. It was like, this guy is great, actually.
You know, he was, no, seriously, like he was agile, he was quick. And then, but after that neck injury, he had to protect himself because, I mean, he's lucky to be, he had enough muscle around his neck that's what saved his life. Otherwise, he would be in a wheelchair.
Then you had the Shockmaster. Oh, we had to go and talk about the Shockmaster here.
Dude, the Shockmaster is one of the funniest bits ever. Just like listening to the whole thing, like, did he just fall on his arse?
And you know what's interesting too? Another funny thing, back in the old early WCW NWA, they had RoboCop trying to help Sting. And
yeah,
it was like I mean, you gotta love the 80s for what it was. I mean, it's I think we could talk about this here, and I'm wearing the guy's shirt, obviously. We talked about it too, and there's some old Japan matches of Hogan back in the early 70s and 80s was also fantastic as well. And Vince McMahon Sr. told him he got that call saying, "Hey, I want to be a part of Rocky 3. You're a wrestler, you're not an actor." He's like, "Well, I'm gonna go do the movie." He does the movie, becomes popular, goes to AWA, and Hulkamania is born. Now everybody thinks that WWE is the one that created Hulkamania, but it was Vern Gagne.
Yeah, it was Vern Gagne. Yeah, you're right.
And Hogan was popular there. Now, were they screwing Hogan out of his shots against Nick Botwinkle? Absolutely. But Hogan ended up getting the money to go back to WWE. Vince saw it and was like, I could build an entire company over that guy right there. Now, was Bob Backlund and Bruno and all them happy about it? No. Because they looked at Hogan and they're like, he's not a true athlete. You know, he's not a true athlete, not a true athlete. And the Iron Sheik was one tough little bastard, too.
Dude, I love following his Twitter. He has the best Twitter account on the internet right now.
Right before we came on, I saw he was talking about Hogan again. He's like, "Hogan, you are jabroni."
Yeah, he says the most random off the wall stuff. It's awesome. I love him.
I mean, now the one thing was when Hogan jump starts, do you think that Hogan and Vince McMahon Jr. themselves, do you think they killed the territories?
I think it was inevitable with the advent of cable. It was just who was going to do it. But I don't think they planned Hogan. I think they planned using his stardom from Rocky 3, like you said.
Yeah.
But I don't think that they planned on it getting over as big as it did.
Michael said he is a friend with a relative of the Iron Sheik.
Well, introduce me, bro.
Yeah, tell him to call so we can get the Iron Sheik on the wrestling show, and he can be like, "Oh, you jabroni, Matt Jones."
Yeah, I'd let him put me in the camel clutch.
I would too, and I would actually sell that motherfucker like there's no tomorrow.
Exactly, right?
But that's another thing too, is it was inedible because the wrestling syndicated, and they were showing pay-per-views on actually in movie theaters at that time, and
Right, with closed circuit.
closed circuit. So it was inedible. I think the way Vince did it, I think pissed a lot of people off because he bought the company from his dad, and his dad's like, "Look, I'll give you the company, but don't take away everybody else's livelihood." And he basically went against his dad's wishes and was like, "I'm going to take this guy. I'm going to take that guy. I'm going to bring Piper." Piper was over there, and the Jim Crockett promotion, he steals Piper, and then he steals this guy, he steals that guy. But Andre was the only one that him and Hogan were the only two that he would allow go to Japan, and he would allow Andre to still go and do other stuff. But Memphis wrestling, the one thing I loved about Mid-South wrestling and the USWA was that whole where you're over there, you have the live crowd, and it's kind of like what the wrestling show does now. They do that interview right in front of the thing, and then they go right straight to the ring.
Exactly. I love that.
I love it too, yeah.
When Matt decided to implement that on the wrestling show, I geeked out because that's like one of my favorite points of Mid-South wrestling.
Xavier, I could think of a bunch of people you would allow that with. Like your Body Star manager.
What, put me in the camel clutch?
Yeah, he thinks you would let Courtney do it.
Well, you know what happens at the Body Stars Ranch stays at the Body Stars Ranch. So
I was booking. If I was booking, I would have Clarence Bodkicker, Kurtwood Smith rescue Sting instead of RoboCop. Yeah, I would have.
yeah.
But then again, though, RoboCop was a big popular movie, and WCW wanted to add star power to it, and that's exactly what happened. But a lot of people think that Hogan was the very first wrestling actor, but actually it was Andre.
Oh, yeah.
Andre was actually on this show where he actually played Bigfoot for real.
The $6 million man.
Yeah. A lot of people thinking like, well, Hogan was the first one to do it. No.
There's actually, you can find clips of it, scenes from it on YouTube, but before any of that, even in like 71, Vern Gagne made a movie called The Wrestler. And it wasn't the one with Mickey Rourke. It was called The Wrestler. There's a funny scene where it's Dirty Dick Murdoch and Dusty Rhodes in a bar hanging out, and they get in a bar fight with these two Japanese guys.
I remember that, actually. And what's also cool, too, is when you see The Wrestler, when you watch the movie The Wrestler, it does explain indie wrestling at its best.
Oh, it does. Especially the locker rooms.
The locker room, you had the people who have been there for 20 years, and then you're coming in there and you're having all this talent, and they're trying to find ways to bring you down. If you don't think, honestly, people, if you don't think that politics is still going on in wrestling and WWE or AEW now, you're mistaken.
Dude, I've been in some indie locker rooms currently as opposed to when I first started, and it's worse now than it ever was.
Everybody wants that brass ring, and
everybody thinks they're going to be the next Rock, like the next Hollywood movie star. They don't understand that they're getting into this business for the wrong reasons, is what I'm getting at.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
They think it's a jumping off point rather than doing what they saw growing up, like what we did.
I wish that they would have stayed with the territories when Flair was popular as the NWA champion and Hulk Hogan, because I would have loved to have seen a crossover at that point. Because it would have been like, so who really is the real champion? So when Ric Flair came to WWE and he had that gold belt with him, I was geeking out. I was like, Flair's here? We're going to see Hogan and Flair? But then they said, no, we're going to go with the Macho Man instead. I'm like, someone said now that the wrestling nowadays remind them of E-Feds.
It kind of does, because it's like it's essentially who looks the best. You know what I mean? And there is a certain look to being a professional wrestler, but I mean, a good example, like you said, is Haku. He doesn't have the traditional look of a professional wrestler, but my God, can he work a match? Or William Regal in the 90s. I mean, William Regal looked like a tennis ball in a tube sock in the 90s.
Yeah. Yep. One of the best workers, I thought one of the best workers who I felt like should have had a world championship run is Kurt Hennig, Mr. Perfect. I felt like he.
It's really funny you bring that up, because I was just having a talk with a guy who I'm going to be working some matches with, and Kurt Hennig is a topic we brought up, and the reason he stayed in the mid card, in my opinion, is because he was the best wrestler for WWF, and they needed a guy to carry that Intercontinental title to put on good matches. Because what Vince McMahon did a lot is his world champion was not necessarily a good wrestler. His world champion was the attraction. So people paid money, like John Cena, or Hogan. They paid the money to come and just see those guys live. But then you had a guy like Mr. Perfect who could wrestle a tennis shoe and make it believable and fun.
That's the reason why I felt like the Intercontinental title meant a lot. And I felt like WWE for a long time got away from making the Intercontinental Championship prestige the way it is. And I feel like now they're trying to go back to putting the right people with the belt. But
who's even the Intercontinental Champion now? I don't follow WWE.
I think it's Shinsuke Nakamura.
Oh, Shinsuke? That's a good choice.
Shinsuke, yeah. Oh, let's see. Joshua says, hey, it's good to see Mykeals back.
Thank you, Joshua. By the way, yesterday was his 63rd birthday, so happy birthday, Josh.
Happy birthday, Josh. Yeah, man. Keep clanging and banging. I want you to be in that gym clanging and banging, man. Because I turn 40 next month, so I'm still in the gym. I still want to go to the gym. So
Dude,
I told myself when I'm in the 70s, I'm still going to be.
Well, yeah, and it keeps you young. Like, look at Billy Gunn. Would you guess Billy Gunn is 57 years old?
No. And he said he's an ancient motherfucker. Woo!
I love Josh. Josh, I know him privately too, but he has some insane knowledge of the indies. He's a good guy whose brain we should be picking too if we ever talk about the indies again.
I need to come to Wisconsin and hang out with you guys and pick Josh's brain too, and just. But then again, Mel will be like, "Oh my God, they're talking for 5 hours here. We're good here. Come on."
So I'm going to pull back the kayfabe curtain a little bit. I went to high school with Josh, and in high school back then, Kev, you couldn't probably remember this, when the internet was first discovered by Al Gore.
Yeah,
every building had one computer hooked up to the internet. Not every computer was hooked up to the freaking internet.
No.
But Josh would book time, and he would read in the mid to late 90s all the dirt sheets when they were actual dirt sheets. It was pretty cool, because he'd be like, no, that's never gonna happen. They'll never turn that guy heel, and sure shit, it would happen.
That is one thing. Now, I was going to ask your opinion on this, because someone asked me my opinion this a couple years ago. I gave my answer, but I'll give my answer after you. Wrestling back then was kind of a PG era, but now we're in a PG era now in WWE. what do you think is missing with this PG era compared to the one back then?
So the era we grew up in, I would say, is PG in true PG sense. The era now, I would say, is Disney. Nickelodeon. It's like watching Nickelodeon. Like back then, they still were PG, programming for the entire family, but they'd still do angles like Miss Elizabeth taking off her skirt and showing her booty to distract somebody. Do you know what I mean? Like there was still that little bit edge of sexuality that wrestling needs. Because wrestling, to be entertaining, in my opinion, needs violence and sexuality. And when you take all that out of the equation and you just have people impressing you with the fact that they can do a 640 moonsault, it, like you said, it's Cirque du Soleil. It's not wrestling.
And another thing I told somebody too, I said, if you really want to watch, I remember going to an old NWA event here at the Municipal Auditorium. My dad took me. It was Ric Flair versus Terry Funk, and they had a feud that was legendary, and it was also violent too. And I remember Ric Flair getting power drived on the concrete by Terry Funk, and I'm sitting there seeing Ric Flair going out in the stretcher, and I kept telling my dad, I'm like, is Ric Flair going to live? Is he? Because it was so realistic. You can actually hear the thud when he hits the concrete. It was like a
right,
and it was just, I'm like, is Ric Flair ever going to wrestle again? And my dad's like, because my dad knew the answer, but obviously he wanted me to keep guessing because I was a kid. I was sitting there thinking, did he just do that? And all of a sudden, when I saw Flair come back, I was like, oh, okay.
And I felt the same way with that angle with Earthquake and Hogan.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
As a kid, I didn't know Hogan was going off to film a movie, so I thought Earthquake actually caved his chest in.
And Hogan sold it great too when he was at that thing. He's like, I don't know if I'm going to come back. I got all these cards from my Hogan Maniacs, and just he sold it perfectly. People can say what you want, but Hogan can sell the shit out of stuff. And now, did he oversell when he got body slam and did that convulsion and stuff like that? Yeah, absolutely. But overselling is also good in wrestling.
Well, yeah, I mean, unless you're trying to throw a match. I mean, like what Shawn did to Hulk at SummerSlam 2006. That's a little too much overselling, but no, I agree with you. Like, he was famous for that convulsing.
I agreed. Wrestling was released from the everyday issues, from the everyday guy. You couldn't hit your boss with a chair, but you could watch Stone Cold do it.
And we'll get to Stone Cold because we're gonna do a whole Attitude Era one because you know what I mean. I feel like, I don't know if you feel this way, Kev, but the Attitude Era deserves its own hour or 2 hours.
Yes. And I think Matt is going to join us with that one. I kind of want to see what Matt's thinking about that. So Josh asks you, Bowski, what's your honest opinion of Jesse the Body Ventura as a wrestler or a color commentator?
Definitely color commentator. So Jesse the Body, he was an okay wrestler, but he was all sizzle. Like his image was essentially superstar Billy Graham. But when you put him on that microphone with Vince McMahon, that was magic. That was absolute magic.
And you put him and Gorilla Monsoon together.
Yep.
Like, when they had that Hogan and Andre, like the invisible force meeting the immovable object. And the fact that he always used to hate on Hogan, and the reason why he hated Hogan, because Jesse Ventura was trying to start a union for the wrestlers, and Hogan went over and told Vince about it, and then they cut that off. And that's why he's always had that hatred towards Hogan. It's been like a never-ending thing. But I think also the hatred is Jesse was trying to be the next superstar Billy Graham, and he wasn't as charisma as Hogan was as far as a wrestler goes.
Oh, exactly.
So Josh asks, was Paul Heyman the Advocate a better heel manager than Paulie Dangerously?
Jeez, that's a hard question because
yeah.
Paulie Dangerously was like, he was a great, just like slimeball used car salesman type manager. And I don't think the Advocate right now would be as over or as big of a deal if it wasn't for that Paulie Dangerously. You know what I mean? Because if we just got Paulie, the former owner of ECW, I don't think there'd be as many connecting dots to make him as believable of an advocate as the work he did in early WCW.
I used to love that old cell phone he had. It was just like the perfect.
Oh,
thing.
the Zach Morris special. The brick.
Zach Morris thing and stuff like that. I think it would be kind of cool if Matt, if you're watching this, if you want me and him to do like a Saved by the Bell thing, we can have Xavier dressed like Zach Morris, and I'll put on the AC Slater singlet. And we'll do it.
That is funny.
And then we'll both get beat up by Crazy with the baseball. But yeah, that's the one thing too. A lot of people, when Warrior came to WCW and talked about his history with Sting, I remember a lot of fans. I remember some wrestling fans at school were coming to me and going, like, the Warrior knows Sting. How do they know each other? I said, dude, they used to be the Blade Runners. I would tell them. I'd be like, you guys didn't know this? They're like, no. I'm like, okay, sit down. Let me explain this to you. That's what I would.
I was that dork in grade school where my mom and dad would buy me PWI in the mid and late 80s. Yeah. So I would know, who they were prior to WWF, and then like I'd tell these kids like, no, and then you'd show them the picture of the Dingo Warrior. That's not the Warrior. That's the original Warrior. The Warrior died, and they got a second one.
If Hogan had won the AWA title off of Botwinkle, do you think WrestleMania would have been as big as it was? No. I mean, you can still have Cyndi Lauper. You can still have Muhammad Ali. You can still have Mr. T there. But
who would they have put in that spot, though? Like, would they have gone with Backlund? I mean, Backlund's a great wrestler, but he has the charisma of a Pez dispenser. I mean, his interviews were just like, they were kind of boring, to be honest with you.
The only reason why he got over is because he went crazy and did that match with Bret Hart where he did the chicken wing for like forever, and then Owen made his mom throw the towel in. But I never really figured Bob Backlund is that great of a guy. I mean, he was a great wrestler, great amateur wrestler, but I don't see who you can put in his spot to do that. I really don't.
Like, that would go up against the level of charisma that Roddy Piper had. I mean, I guess kind of. I was reading something that he was going to go with Snuka because Snuka was really over, but Snuka couldn't talk. You know what I mean? He wasn't good on the microphone.
Now, a lot of people, when you bring up Jimmy Snuka, they'll say the conspiracy theorists will say that that Vince helped Jimmy cover up his being a part of the murder, and I'm like, yeah, I don't. When it talks about stuff like that, I don't talk about it a lot because.
See, in the 80s and 90s, we didn't know about that until the advent of the internet and the Patriot Act. Because when the Patriot Act let everything loose for you to find anything you want on the internet.
Yep.
Essentially. So I mean, nobody really knew about that in the 80s. All they knew is Snuka was an incredible wrestler. He just couldn't talk. I mean, all of his interviews were like, yeah, but I gotta chop you, brother, and then we'll go to Shoney's and eat a buffet, brother.
Yeah, brother. I'm gonna go over there, jump on your brother, and then I'm gonna get hit in a coconut by Roddy Piper in the head.
I mean, because English was his second language, so I don't know if they would have put a manager with him. But what manager? Because Heenan wasn't part of WWE at that time, was he?
Yes, he was. Yeah, he was. He had the Heenan family, but he didn't have. He didn't have him at first. Like, he didn't have Jimmy Snuka. But I think if you would have put Bobby Heenan with him, it would have worked.
But, I'm just saying, like, there was no real manager that could talk that great in early WWF at the time, besides Bobby Heenan.
Josh said that if Hogan wasn't there, you could have put Paul Orndorff for Billy Graham. And Hogan.
Yeah, Orndorff would have been good.
Man, those matches between Hogan and Orndorff back then, being two Florida boys, they were physical going at each other too. And the one thing that a lot of people don't understand is the reason why people were probably butt kissing Hogan back then and butt kissing Flair is because when you did house shows, if you're on the card with the world champion, you made more money.
Oh yes, definitely. So that's why everybody wanted to work with Hogan. He was a household name. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Now I do know that they started doing the merchandise stuff around that time too. That's when we first started seeing the shirts and the merchandise sales. And um, I had to tell somebody one time that Hogan's theme in WWE when he came back was not the real American. It was actually the Eye of the Tiger. Then it changed to this, oh, doom.
Yes, I remember that.
Yeah. And then, people are like, well, I thought it was just only real American. I'm like, ooh.
Well, no, and they used Eye of the Tiger to capitalize on the whole
Thunder Lips, Rocky 3.
Thunder Lips, Rocky. Yeah.
But were you more of a was you more of a Ric Flair guy or more of a Hogan guy back then?
Definitely a Hogan guy. The older I get, I become like more of a Flair 70s and 80s guy just because of the wrestling, because Flair was allowed to do more by the promoters than Hogan was. But growing up, oh my God, I was a Hulkamaniac. I even used to force my mom to buy me the Hulk Hogan vitamins. Because he had his own brand of vitamins.
Yeah. Actually, I know who would have fit in. If you would have put Macho Man as a face and have him team up with Mr. T to face those two would have been crazy enough to probably do it.
Yeah, and Macho Man could talk. That's the big thing, because like Hogan's charisma is he could talk. He didn't really need to wrestle a 5-star match as long as he could talk, throw the big boot, and drop the leg. You know what I mean?
And when people do the leg drop now, when I see Becky Lynch do it, or when I saw Undertaker doing it, I'm like, it doesn't have that rump. But when you see Hogan do it, Hogan's like jumping high in the air.
Yep.
When he's doing it, and it's like boom, that's like 300-pound leg dropping on you. And one thing too about wrestling I liked back then was the larger than life like characters. Like they had Cheap J Strombo, they had Rocky Johnson, who was actually a pretty good charisma guy too. The Rock's dad. It was a really good charisma.
And I think a lot of that was because there was no social media. Like, so right now people are kind of seeing me out of character, which is, something that wouldn't have happened back in the day. But a lot of people watching this, Kev, don't know a lot about my private life, which is what adds to the superstar gimmick and mystique when they see it on the wrestling show. That is what I'm getting at, was big in the 80s and early 90s, is you didn't know what these guys were like outside of the ring. So when you'd see them in an arena, they were that character. And it was bigger. It was magic. I was never a Hacksaw Jim Duggan fan, but I saw him wrestle once, and it was just like amazing seeing him live. A big mistake these current wrestlers do is they post shit on their social media about their private life. So first of all, who cares about what they do in their private life? We all have an asshole and we all wipe it. And secondly, it takes away from their mystique. It makes them a normal person.
And that's one thing I don't like about with CM Punk when he does that elbow drop of Macho Man. There's nobody that can do that elbow drop like Macho Man. You can try it all day long. But when Macho Man flies, he flies.
Here's the thing. So Josh, who comments, he wrestled in the Indies with me. Josh and I are two of the few people I know personally that do not copy other wrestlers' stuff. For the sole fact that, to get my point across, I'll use this as an example. Dolph Ziggler. Dolph Ziggler is probably one of the greatest wrestlers of this current generation. However, he's a chump because his whole gimmick is he's Billy Gunn and Shawn Michaels. He's not Dolph Ziggler. You know what I mean? The greatest advice Josh and I got when we were training was, you may like Shawn Michaels. Don't be Shawn. Be the first superstar. Xavier Mykeals. Be the first LKS King. Do something you can like pay homage to their moves, but to do it verbatim, it takes you out of the moment. Because then people like you and I, Kev, seeing that, we're not saying like, oh, that's CM Punk doing an elbow drop. We're seeing, oh, that's CM Punk copying Macho Man. Oh, that's Dolph Ziggler copying Shawn Michaels. Like, get your own fucking moves, guys. You're millionaire athletes. Get your own fucking moves.
The only reason why I'm okay with Kevin Owens doing the stunner because he did it the right way by calling Steve Austin and asking.
The respect thing, yes.
Yes. Like when Bray Wyatt was doing the mandible claw, he called Mick Foley. He said, "Hey, can I use this?" Foley's like, "Go ahead, do it."
Exactly.
Now when I did the wrestling back then, did I do a little bit of punches that were kind of like what Hogan did? Yes. I mean, I did some things that were like the wrestlers that I liked, but I did it in my own way.
I think though that you bring up a solid point. I think all of us do that to a certain extent. Like, I will work a match a little bit like Bret Hart because that's what I grew up liking.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not a total, like photocopy of what he did. So it's like inevitable. Yeah, like since you were a big Hogan guy, of course you liked the way those punches were thrown. Just like I liked the way that Jerry Lawler used to throw a punch. Lawler, I think, in my opinion, has the best working punch ever in wrestling.
Oh, hands down, yeah. And Bret was good too. Bret was good with his punches as well. But
yes,
yeah. Now that I do a little bit of some of Taker stuff. Now, actually, back then I created something. I don't know if I could do it now because I'm not older and bigger now. I was. But I used to be able to do the sharpshooter and then lean back while I have their legs trapped right here. I can lean back and actually grab their chin and do it like that, which was I figured I was like, well, if I'm going to do the sharpshooter, I got to do it my way.
Right.
And you got to pay homage to certain people. And like, I came up with this thing where I look like I was doing the F5, but then when he comes down, I catch you with the RKO or just
see I used to do stuff like that there was this one guy named Bob that we wrestled against. And I didn't do it to Bob because I disliked him, but Bob was just like, he was like a made out of putty. Do you know what I mean? Like, he was lean and you could bend him. So I'd put him in a Mexican surfboard. You know what I'm talking about? Where you stand on the back of their legs, pull them up so they're
What's on up, top. JB?
And then I'd let go of his arms and turn it into a chin lock.
Well, I can tell you this much. Like, if I come down there and if me and you were to work a match together, I would look at Matt and I'd be like, dude, just film it. Let me and him call it to each other. Just back away. Like, let me and him just do this. We know what we're doing. We're good.
Yeah, calling a match is that's how I was brought up. And, and I can see like a lot of, I think the pandemic, they did a lot of cinematic stuff. Do you know what I mean? Like cut takes and stuff. Because I did watch some wrestling right after they got crowds again. And it was almost like they were nervous to be in front of a crowd.
Yeah. I noticed that too. So we got JB. We got another body star in the house.
JB is my boy. I love that guy. He's a talented mofo. I'll tell you that.
And by the way, JB, I was impressed with your match on the wrestling show. It was definitely he's definitely getting a lot better in the ring.
And his gear looks badass.
Oh my God, I love that gear. When I saw that gear, I was like, where the hell I remember I asked you, like, where do you get his gear at? It's like,
so there's two questions and the gear is a funny story. There's two questions any indie promoter is going to ask you. Who trained you? Like, where did you work? Who trained you? And the second question is, do you have gear? And that I love JB's gear. I don't like when I see a lot of indie guys wearing street clothes.
It worked for guys like Raven and it worked for guys like, certain guys like that. But yeah, you have to have some kind of look that represents you. You have to represent yourself. So if I went into the ring, I would be K-Dog. I'd be KD again, and I would dress the way I used to. That's exactly what I would do. And
right, you pander to your body type. Like, even guys who are a little huskier, like say Abdullah the Butcher, he'd wear those really baggy pants. You know what I mean? So that he still looked badass, but he was at least in wrestling gear. I mean, the saddest example of trying to embarrass somebody ever was what Vince McMahon did to Mike Shaw.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
For people who don't know what I'm talking about, Mike Shaw was known as Norman the Lunatic in WCW. And he was one of their best brawlers character. He was a mental patient. and he wore like, you know, the scrubs to the ring. But he was over as shit. He was a great brawler. So then when Vince McMahon brought him over, Vince didn't like him because he was overweight. So Vince repackaged him as Bastion Booger and made him walk down to fart noises.
I know. I so bad.
And he literally, I was reading some shoot interviews, and a lot of the writers said that Vince told them have the clothing department find the most unflattering costume for this guy. That's the type of guy Vince McMahon was. Total prick.
And you know what's interesting too is he would change a guy like who else did he change gimmicks for? Like there was somebody else. I'm trying to think of his name here, but he would do stuff to like he would make Barry Horowitz a jobber, which I think the wrestler needs to go back to that. They need to have like jobber wrestlers that
journeyman, like journeyman guys who would get other dudes over.
Right. I think you need to go back to that because that's one of the things I loved about Barry Horowitz because I'm like, wow, you know Barry Horowitz is going to get his ass kicked. You already know what's going to happen. But it keeps away so you don't have to see AJ Styles versus Samoa Joe for 20 times on TV. You save it for the pay-per-view.
Right. And, you know, wrestling, a lot of wrestling is getting to that now where it's just redundancy. Like you see the same people wrestling each other over and over and over again. And it's because they don't have that enhancement talent, you know, and a lot of times enhancement talent are more talented than the actual wrestler themselves because they have to know how to work with anybody.
So Josh asks, which career would you write a book about, Dusty Rhodes or Mick Foley's?
Jesus.
Oh my gosh.
I would have to say, like, at this point in my life, I'd be more interested in reading about Dusty or writing and reading about Dusty, just because, you know, he's from that era. Like Dusty's even said, like, if Flair bought a mink coat, he bought a mink coat. If Flair bought somebody a case of wine, he bought a case of wine. You know, so there's those funds outside of the ring stories. Foley is a great wrestler. Foley is funny as shit, but Foley, you know, like, he was a family man. He went back to the hotel room after the shows, you know?
The one thing too about Dusty Rhodes, that's another guy who Vince, I felt like, disrespected because when he finally went to the WWF back in the late 80s, early 90s, had him with Sapphire with that stupid polka dot stuff on. And I'm sitting there thinking, that's not Dusty Rhodes.
Well, it was even before that he was making fun of Dusty because Dusty's real name is Virgil Reynolds. Mm-hmm. And the way that Vince stuck it to Dusty in the 80s is he decided to name Ted DiBiase's manservant after Ted DiBiase as a kind of a parallel to how Dusty was, you know, working with WCW. It's a true story if you read it.
So Josh asked you a question. If you were forced to make a TikTok with your favorite wrestler from the 80s, who would it be and why would it be the Warlord?
Dude, TikTok is like, I call it titty talk.
It is, yeah, pretty much is. Those
but
girls are always like, the girls are like, do you see my camera?
Yeah, I don't get it. There is some funny stuff, but if I'd have to choose a wrestler from the 80s, did he say the 80s?
Yeah.
I don't know if it would be Warlord. I think it would be fun to do one with like Macho Man. Can you imagine Macho Man if you just tell him like, all right, we're going to try to do something funny here. All right, brother. Yeah.
As long as you don't look at Elizabeth, yeah, we don't get a problem, brother.
Yeah, I'm not okay with that. Yeah.
I'm okay with that. Now, you know who I would have done something with? I would like to have an eating contest with George the Animal Steel. That's what I do on TikTok, yeah.
There's another guy that Vince censored because there's some early George the Animal Steel stuff in Mid-South Wrestling from 79, 80, 81. And holy shit, he was a great wrestler. Dropped holds, headlock takeovers. I mean, he wasn't just like walking around like he just got hit in the head with a bed, you know, like a frying pan and doesn't know what day of the week it is.
So Josh asks, was Big John Studd underutilized in the Golden Era?
He definitely was, and that is the whole reason for that is Andre. I hate to say it because I love Andre, but it's a well-known fact that Andre did not like other big men because he felt like he'd lose his spot. So John Studd is unfortunately a casualty of that with Andre in WWF.
Like I remember Hogan saying that Big John Studd thought Andre was going to kill him. And,
Yeah.
And what's weird though is when Undertaker comes into WWE right before Andre retire. Well, when Andre's retiring, Andre tells him. Andre actually likes him and says, "Hey, I want to do a match with you eventually."
Yeah, isn't that crazy? But I mean, I think it's because Mark Calloway was such a easygoing guy backstage that you could get along with. Because that's the whole thing with Andre. If you got along with Andre, he'd put you over. But if you if you bucked the system, Andre hated you. From what I've read, I obviously never knew him personally.
Let's see. Josh says, name 3 Golden Era wrestlers you would want gladly to have your side in a ballroom brawl. Okay. I think I would do Andre, Haku, Bruiser Brody. I'm good.
Those are good ones. Jesus, 3 Golden Age. I think I would do Bruiser, Harley Race, and Haku.
Haku, man. I mean, now my brother was actually into the Golden Age of wrestling. He teaches my my nieces and nephews how to do the whole Dusty Rhodes elbow, and they'll do like little fights with each other. And my brother, I mean, we used to make fun of the Berserker, the whole husk. Do
you know that was Vince just making fun of Bruiser Brody?
Yes.
That's all that gimmick was, because Bruiser Brody did that where he would, go hoof, hoof.
Vince was an asshole. I mean, damn. I mean, had a tragedy not struck, would Carrie Von Erich be in Bret Hart's place in '93?
I doubt it. I mean, so this is, I don't know if you differ opinion on this with me, but Carrie Von Erich had a look. He was a sexy looking guy. He had the talent. However, what he lacked was that when he opened his mouth, he lacked that intangible, like that Bret had, Shawn had, like the talking aspect of it. Like if they would have put Kerry with somebody as his manager, or it was like a Lesnar Heyman thing, then definitely he could have been in Bret's spot. But I don't know, like it's kind of cringe worthy if you go back now and watch his WWF stuff when he like tries to challenge Perfect for the belt. It's almost like you're watching a kid trying to ask their parents if they can stay up late to watch a monster movie.
That's what I also felt like too. Was there's another guy who I feel like is the most unutilized manager. I love this guy, Percy Pringle, William Moody. When he was great, even before his pallbearer.
Oh yeah, I loved Percy Pringle, but then he got typecast when he went with Vince. I think the most he ever broke out of his shell and was Percy Pringle again is when he dyed his hair blonde and was with the Kane during the Attitude Era.
And I thought it was really cool that he was a real mortician. I thought that was some really cool stuff when they found out about that. That was like, wow, he's a real mortician, so he knows how to do stuff. But what you were answering about the Carrie Von Erich thing, I don't think he would have took Bret's spot. Like I do agree that if you put him with the right person, he would have done it. But that Texas Tornado gimmick did not do him any favors.
Well, it's because in the late 80s, early 90s, Vince thought everybody needed something else besides their actual name. Do you know what I mean?
So Michael asks you, I want to hear the thoughts on the Red Rooster, why you love him as a superstar. Why you love him as a superstar?
I love Terry Taylor. I loved Terry Taylor in Mid-South. But I do not know what the story is behind whatever he did to McMahon, the McMahon family, that when he came to WWF, they gave him that Red Rooster gimmick. Like, how in the fuck do you think that's going to get over? Even as a 10-year-old kid, I saw that guy with his red mohawk and thought, what a fucking idiot. Like what is this?
Oh, my gosh. I felt that way, too, about certain wrestlers. Like, when I saw them, I was like, who are you supposed to be? Like, when they had the gobbledygooker come out, I was like, what in the actual... And he was dancing with Mean Gene. I'm like, what in the world are we doing here? And then, we would have I don't know if a lot of people remember this, but they did a music video called Pile Driver. with the wrestlers in there playing music and stuff like that. And it was actually, I actually got a friend on this because a friend of mine watched the documentary of, he watched the interview with DDP and Stone Cold recently, which is a good interview. Y'all haven't seen it, but he told me, he's like, dude, I didn't know that DDP was in WrestleMania 6. Like, oh, you didn't know he was Honky Tonk Man's driver? I'm like,
yeah, it's weird. It's weird to go back and watch that now and realize within a few months of that footage, of WrestleMania 6, he was going to be, the Diamond Stud, or with the Diamond Stud. Sorry.
I can tell you this much. Kevin Nash has always said the worst thing he hated the most was eyes.
And here's the thing, like a lot of people bitch about like they don't like their gimmick and shit like that. If it wasn't for Oz and if it wasn't for Vinny Vegas, I highly, highly doubt Kevin Nash would have been a success. Because I mean, there's a few people who I've known who've had shitty gimmicks, and it's like they learned from it. They at least at the time made that gimmick work, but then it's kind of like steam, like pressure boiling up. That real attitude, that real Kevin Nash wanted to get out, and he kind of did it with Diesel. But you're right, the Oz was like the Oz was cringeworthy. It was like the Shockmaster.
And, I used to know an indie wrestler here called the Boogie Woogie Man, or the Boogie Woogie, and he's like in his 50s. He still wrestles to this day. Has his wife come out with him. He's fun loving, but I'm sitting there thinking that Boogie Woogie gimmick you've had for 20 something years. Let's.
Yeah, and we do shit on a lot of current wrestling because it used to be just like so good, and it's like if you don't adapt with the times, you're going to go out of business. So I can understand why, a lot of the new age guys are doing what they do, but there has to be some like semblance of this is still like professional wrestling. And I don't see a lot of it nowadays. Do you see any wrestlers, Kev, that you like watch currently that could have like made it back in the old days? Like, could you imagine the Young Bucks trying to put on a match back in the late 80s, early 90s?
I think Brock and Bobby Lashley would have thrived. Being two big behemoths and, Brock having an amateur background. I think that Brock and Bobby Lashley would have survived the 80s.
Yeah.
Because they had the look and everything. I think they would have survived. Undertaker definitely would have survived.
Oh, yeah.
I think there's a couple. I don't think there's anybody on AEW that I feel like can survive the 80s. I really don't. I don't see anybody on the roster. Maybe Jericho, but
yep, Jericho.
Yeah, maybe Jericho, but I don't see anybody else on there that I could really be like, hey, that guy can do it. Like,
one guy who I really think could have made it back then was Sammy Callahan from Impact.
Oh yes. Definitely.
And I'm not just saying that because he's my cousin. I love Sammy Callahan. He's another one of those guys. He found the whole Sammy Callahan gimmick because he actually worked for WWE, before he went to Impact. And they held him down and they wanted him to be something he wasn't. And, he left. Like a lot of people. I mean, look at what happened with Toni Storm. I do not blame that woman for walking out on WWE.
She's a great talent, and that's I'll tell anybody this. You want to know how big Dusty Rhodes was to this business? You look at Sasha Banks, and you look at Bayley, you look at Becky Lynch, and all those girls that came up from NXT. They wouldn't be where they were at without Dusty Rhodes as their trainer.
No,
in NXT, and that's how big. A lot of people don't understand how big Dusty Rhodes was for this company. And JB just said Kevin Nash is a douchebag.
Yeah, I mean, in real life, Kevin Nash is a total douchebag.
Someone just told me technically Paul White is on the roster, Kev. I think he would have made it in the early 80s. Okay. So Paul White and Jericho in AEW probably would have.
Oh God, yeah, there's a few others. Like Dustin would have made it just because he's Dustin.
Yeah, Dustin.
But I mean, a lot of the guys who are popular now, I don't think would have made it.
Like the Kenny Omegas wouldn't have made it. Like the Young Bucks wouldn't have made it. CM Punk wouldn't have made it.
I think Kenny Omega would have had a niche, though. I do like Kenny Omega, but I think ever since it's a different Kenny Omega that we're getting in AEW. He's changed his style. When he was in New Japan, he was pretty goddamn stellar. I mean, he reminded me in New Japan at times of the second coming of Macho Man, but in AEW, it's different. And I don't know if it's because for the last year or two, they've made him play heel with Don Callis. But yeah, I see what you mean by current Kenny Omega. I didn't mean to interrupt you. Sorry.
No, you're cool. I mean, I like Kenny Omega, and I think I respect Kenny Omega now because I saw that video where he was getting his back adjusted, and he really loves the business. Like, he doesn't hate on WWE. He doesn't hate on Impact Wrestling. He's just he's a fan of the game, and I actually appreciate that. When I heard him say that, my respect for Kenny Omega went up here.
Right.
I think Daniel Bryan probably could have survived. He could have been another Bob Backlund, maybe. But
how did we not think of Daniel Bryan? He's been consistently putting on probably the only good matches AEW really, or I should say, current wrestling in general really has on TV. Daniel Bryan has.
Yeah, Daniel Bryan's matches has been really great, and I think that was. Let's see, Kenny Omega was a junior weight for most of his career in New Japan Wrestling. I think AEW is full of grown. It's a full-grown Omega. I would argue. Wow. Sorry about that. Go ahead.
Here's the weird thing about AEW is it's such a diverse cast of characters that it's hard to tell because. So here's an example. Josh and I were at a wrestling show once, and Don Callis actually got on an elevator with us, right? Don Callis, the guy who managed the Jackal from WWF.
Yeah.
And we were both taller than him. But if you see Don Callis walk to the ring with Kenny Omega, he's like the same size. Kenny Omega is the same size as a lot of those other guys. So it's really weird how it's almost like wrestlers are shrinking. Do you know what I mean? And I'm by no means a giant. I'm 6 feet tall. With my boots on, I'm 6'1".
I am 6'1", with my boots I'm 6'2", maybe 6'3" at the most. So it's I understand what you're saying. It looks like everybody's shrinking because when you get wrestlers side by side with each other, it's like I thought that guy was 6'7". This guy looks like he's shorter.
Well, I went to a live AEW show, and when Billy Gunn came out, so Billy Gunn is what, 6'5"?
Yeah.
I think 6'5". Yeah. He looked like Andre the Giant competing in that match. Like, his boys came up to his pectorals, and I can't remember who they were wrestling, but he just looked like a freaking giant among all those people.
Josh says, I would argue that the 2021 Impact was better than his 2021 AEW. Talking about Kenny Omega.
Oh, about Omega? I would have to agree. I mean, Omega's a little bit more, Impact's a little bit more old school in their presentation with wrestling matches in general.
Hangman Page, he said, is spectacular. And JB says this is the new age of the smaller guys. And I agree on that. I mean, the smaller guys, but even I think we're going to talk about this one. I think one of the biggest things that's lacking in wrestling nowadays on all promotions is tag team wrestling.
Bingo.
That is lacking. I know Vince hates tag team wrestling. I don't know why, but you look at the Hart Foundation back then, the Killer Bees, the British Bulldogs, and the fact that they came out with a bulldog, I thought was really cool. And you had like Power and Glory, Strike Force with Rick Martel and Tito Santana, and then you had War and the Barbarian. You had Demolition. Demolition, I think, still had one of the best themes back then. I mean, I have that on my workout playlist. Just how good
that is. Doesn't that song pump you up? I love that.
It does.
So here's a little thing. Here's a scoop about old school wrestling. So in the 80s, the tag teams were still great because that's what fans were still accustomed to. If you go to a live show, or even on TV, it was like 70% tag teams, because what the promoters wanted to do is they wanted to keep the guys apart individually so that you would pay money to go to the big shows to see, let's say, Jimmy fight Johnny one-on-one. So they put Jimmy and Johnny in tag teams so that they could still have them on the air. There could still be like, a fight between the two of them, but they were in a tag team. The fans got so accustomed to tag teams that it just kind of boiled over to the national expansion that Vince McMahon had. But then the one thing Vince did do is he added his Hollywood flair to it, which I love Demolition. I love the Hart Foundation. I love the Rockers, the Killer Bees, Strike Force, all those guys from the late 80s. But see, the thing with nowadays wrestling is everybody wants to be the star. Everybody wants to be the center of attention. They don't think anybody else is as good as them, which is the reciprocal of what a successful tag team is. You know what I mean?
I know you don't watch the current product now, but there is a tag team in WWE right now who I absolutely love because their charisma is up here, and they're called the Street Profit. And they come out with these little, these are two black guys, but the way they talk and the way they move in the ring, it's like they're good. Especially the one guy is better than the other one. And now I'm hearing rumors that WWE wants to break them up and put the other guy as a singles guy.
That doesn't surprise me. I know who you're talking about. I haven't seen much of their stuff, but we talked about this before, like Hurt Business.
Yep.
Which was one of the greatest factions I've seen in the last 15 years of wrestling. They broke up instantly because they had an organic build. They put these guys together in the Hurt Business organically. The fans started liking them organically. So, of course, the promoter's like, nope, this is not my vision of the script. Let's break them up.
And then they try to bring them back together again. And now they have one of them. Now they have Bobby Lashley beat him up again. And I'm sitting there thinking, you guys are messing up on that. Josh asked, do you guys think that the Ring of Honor's 20 years is more or less impressive than TNA and Impact's 20 years as a whole?
That's a trick question. I don't know if I should answer it.
I don't know if I want to answer that one either.
Because I'll get heat from not only the wrestling fans, but from Josh. So, Josh, yes, I agree and disagree.
Same here, because if I say anything like that, especially if I talk about AEW, these fans will come at me with pitchforks. So,
but see, like that's a hard question to answer, like in all seriousness, because the upswing of Impact Wrestling, like when Impact started, you had in the main event scene a lot of the guys that were in the downswing of their career, and a lot of the guys in the X division are now the main players in current wrestling. So I don't know, and the same can be said about ROH. I mean, ROH had guys like Kevin Steen, and Tyler Black, and
Samoa Joe started there.
Yeah, so it's like that's a hard one. Like, I think that's to be honest with you, that question is a preference because they both, I think, have the same level of impact in current wrestling with each other.
Yeah, I agree with that. That's the best way to say it, because if one of us chose Impact over Ring of Honor, those Ring of Honor fans would be like, they created CM Punk, they created Daniel Bryan, what are you talking about? Blah, 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 blah. And they would just be like, yep, I have to explain this one.
But an Impact created AJ Styles. You know what I mean?
I met him once. AJ is a really good dude. A real good dude.
You can just tell by the way he relates on camera that he is a good human being.
Let's see what JB says. I love AEW. It's the reason I started watching again. I do think every episode was the best, and they get better and better. No, some are great, others are better. Nice way to say it. Yeah, I agree with that.
I'd agree with JB because AEW is the only product I really watch right now. I don't have access to I guess I do with some friends. I could go watch with them with Impact. I don't really have access to a lot of Impact. But yeah, AEW is the only product I watch.
Well, you're talking about opening up that forbidden door. I don't know if you heard the rumor, but Mickie James is now the Impact Wrestling Champion, and I know she's part of NWA, but she's going to be with the championship belt. She's going to be in the Royal Rumble. Yeah,
there's some backstage shenanigans going on. I mean, I don't know if they already own Impact Wrestling. Do you know what I mean? WWE.
Secretly behind the scenes, yeah.
Because I can't foresee Nick Khan and Vince McMahon letting another promotion's title being on there if they don't have their hands in the honeypot.
Oh, absolutely. Let's see. Josh says it's crazy to think that Hulk Hogan and Randy Savage's final matches were in TNA.
Yes, and it's and see, I don't think Macho should have came back. Have you ever seen that last match of his in TNA? It's kind of hard to watch. It's like when Shawn came back and wrestled at Crown Jewel. It's one of those things that I just kind of put out of my memory.
I think the thing with Shawn would have worked if they would have had him and AJ.
Yeah, you're right. But that match was a cluster fuck between the Brothers of Destruction and DX.
Yep. Kane wasn't prepared. Undertaker was out of shape. Triple H tore his pectoral muscle.
I know, right?
I mean, that match was just doomed from the start.
No, but yeah, that is weird. I mean, TNA does give people more of a stage, I think, than a lot of other promotions. I do agree with JB, though, that AEW is the best current product that we have the option of on a national level because they will give people opportunities to prove themselves.
The one thing I worry about with AEW, and I tell anybody this, is I watch football, so obviously, the Khans own the Jacksonville Jaguars, and I just think that Tony Khan is paying these wrestlers way too much. Like, he's giving like people like Brandy Rose $2 million a year, and I'm like, Cody, I can understand, but Brandy,
that's probably a thing. Like Hogan had that going on too, though, in WCW. Like, Brutus Beefcake was making a couple $1 million a year, and he was the freaking like Zodiac.
And then he was the booty man.
Yeah. And it was just because he was Hulk Hogan's best friend. So the only reason Brandy's making that money is because she's doinking one of the VPs.
Let's see here. Josh says, I see it exactly that Khan and McMahon would want to bring back Impact back into the light. They could put Impact over as a number 2 promotion to hurt AEW. Imagine WWE loaning AJ Styles to Impact.
That would be amazing. Like if WWE did a thing with Impact like AEW would, considering too that AJ Styles is the John Cena of Impact. Do you know what I mean? Like,
yep,
he is the name that built that place. I shouldn't say that. He is the one that TNA created organically by themselves, because TNA did have a lot of big names in there, like Kurt Angle and Foley and Hogan.
And that's one thing about AJ, and a lot of people don't know that he started in WCW right before they ended, and when he went to Impact, his character just grew and grew and grew and grew. But if they ever lend AJ back to Impact, that'd be great. Now I do know that Mickie James wants that dream match with Charlotte, and Charlotte wants it with her. I'm sitting there thinking, if you're Impact Wrestling, you like, hey, how about if I loan Mickie at WrestleMania 38? As long as she comes out with our belt.
Could you imagine a title for title Impact versus WWE? That would actually be pretty cool.
Then it goes back to the territories. Now, do you think wrestling as a whole now needs to go back to that territory mindset?
There's a certain magic of that territory mindset where, guys, the big stars would come and go. So like Andre, for instance, as an example, wasn't every single week in Mid-South. He'd be there for about 2 months and then he'd leave for about 6. So when he was there, it was hot. It was magic. And in that 6 months he was gone, they'd ride the roller coaster of momentum when they had all the big names in during the summer months. You know what I'm saying? So it was recycling talent. You didn't always have the same 2 guys on top. That is a big plus of the territory, because if you can take a guy off, like Brock Lesnar, I think that's why he's still huge. He's an attraction. He's off TV. Now, a lot of people give him shit. Yes. But I mean, it kind of works for him if you think about it. To play devil's advocate, he's off the air and he only makes 4 appearances a year. If you could get if you could get paid to make 4 appearances a year and make $20 million, wouldn't you do that?
Suplexing people. That's all
Yeah.
I had to do. Yep. Absolutely. Yep. I would look at Vince and be like, "Pin, I'll sign."
I mean, we can't hate on Lesnar for that. I mean, I agree it kind of sucks for like the guys up and coming, but Vince McMahon could easily say, "No, dude, you're working 200 days a year. Get on the road." So you know it's coming down from the top that he's saying, "Okay, yeah, you'll be at our 4 main shows."
Now, here's something. JB says, "What if Mickie wins the Royal Rumble this year?"
I might actually start watching WWE again if that happens.
You know what's even cool is that on NWA Power, their world champion is actually Trevor Murdoch.
I know, which is crazy because his dad was actually NWA champion too, Dick.
Now, I did have a little soft spot that one time that Cody Rhodes, they did the All Out pay-per-view, and Cody Rhodes won the NWA championship. I actually had a little tear in my eye because I know that his dad would have been proud of him for that.
Oh, yeah, and who would have ever thought that Cody, the youngest Rhodes brother, would win the NWA title? You know what I mean?
It's insane. I mean, now if you were booking wrestling back in the day, would Hogan still be your world champion, or would you have him held it for that long, or would you give people like?
Okay, let's clarify something though. Is Hogan already Hogan? Like, is he already established as Hulk Hogan with
Yes, yeah,
trained Sayer? Okay, then
yeah.
Yes, I would have the IQ of a nickel if I wouldn't use Hogan as my attraction. I mean, he was a license to print money back in the day, so I would definitely use Hogan as the main attraction. But what I'd book more heavily on, like, I think I'd book Hogan in the '80s, like how Brock is booked now. Like, I'd give him the time off except for the main pay-per-views and have guys like Mr. Perfect, Rick Rude, Jake the Snake, all those guys carry the company year round. The guys that I knew actually can produce good matches.
And I would also allow Hogan to wrestle the way he did in New Japan.
Oh, definitely. A lot of promoters nowadays don't understand that you need to have a very strong mid-card for your main event scene to have any relevance.
And that's why people get pissed at Brock. Here recently, Brock's been on here more than 4 times. He's actually been on every week here recently. But
dude, I love his new gimmick.
Me too. He did a promo on Monday night. I just went back and watched it on YouTube because I heard about it. Him and Bobby Lashley are fighting at the Royal Rumble. And he goes up to Bobby. He does a knock-knock joke in Philadelphia. And Paul Heyman goes, "Oh, Brock's doing a knock-knock joke." Okay, he's like, "Knock-knock." And he goes, "Who's there?" "Bobby." He's like, "Bobby who?" "Exactly."
I did not see that. That's awesome.
I was like, this Brock Lesnar is cool. I actually like the ponytail and everything.
Right? Like, somebody on one of the message boards asked, like, what would you change his music to? Like, if he had, just by his current look. I would personally go with Cotton Eye Joe.
Yeah. I would go with Cotton Eye Joe on that. I mean, it's I can actually see him dancing down the ring with
right?
that. I mean, Brock's got a personality that a lot of people don't realize, and Brock would definitely fit in back in the golden era.
Oh God, yeah. And like, getting back to that golden era, like, what do you think made, so there was 2 promotions that Vince could not put out of business for the longest time. And I want to know what you think of how they survived. USWA and Smoky Mountain.
I think because in the southern states, they were so strong, and with Jerry Lawler and the Jarretts being behind USWA, Vince was smart enough to realize, hey, well, these guys are not going anywhere. They're still going to keep fighting. So I need to have a relationship with these guys. That's when you started seeing like Undertaker go to USWA for a little bit, and you'll see like, Sid would show up there, and Jerry Lawler, signs with WWE in '92 or '93, and then you start seeing a change. I think the Smoky Mountain, though, you can never. These guys are still wrestling to this day, but the Rock and Roll Express are still wrestling to this very day.
They were so over in the South, and part of USWA not going out of business was the fact that Cornette still had like his pinky toe in the McMahon door. You know what I mean? Because there were shows where he got like WWE talent. I'll give him that. But those are really the last two territorial promotions that ever existed.
And I think that I'm speaking of Jim Cornette. I met him at a convention once and got an autograph and a picture with him. A lot of people have negative things to say about Jim Cornette, but he told me some funny stories. So I have to. But one story I have to say for the Attitude Era one, it's about Sean and Brett. I'll save that one for the Attitude Era one because you guys are going to get a kick out of what he told me. Let's just say it involves Shawn Michaels and his hair. That's all I'm going to say. That's all I'm going to say to it. But I think in a lot of cases, those are the only two. Yeah, that's the only two that I would remember that actually lasted for quite a while before going out of business.
Well, and it's funny too because back in the day, you had to actually buy magazines to see like a lot of the dirt sheet rumors. So I remember buying like the Insider and a few other magazines, and if you flip to the back, they had the rankings of the best wrestlers in the world.
I remember those, yeah.
But they were separated by company. They never did like they do, you know what I mean? They never really did, besides once a year for the PWI 500, who the best ones were. But it was always WWF, WCW, and USWA. Those were always the three, you know what I mean? And that just goes to show that. And USWA only really promoted in Tennessee. I mean, they did go out of the state a few times. But that just goes to show how, like powerful that wrestling was to that Southern crowd, especially Jerry Lawler, because he was in the main event scene that whole time.
And one thing too, they did a lot of shows here in Nashville. They did it at the old fairgrounds here. That unfortunately they're going to start changing into a soccer stadium, which is I don't even want to get into that because I actually had a chance to wrestle there once in that building and. The fact that and that's where the TNA Asylum was at. And
I did not know that.
TNA Asylum was inside that fairgrounds in Nashville. And that they used to be packed. Like you couldn't fit that many people in there, but they used to be people at the door going, "Can I get in? Can I get in? Can I get in? Can I get in?" And it was insane how much a smaller crowd sometimes is better than a bigger crowd.
Yeah, I mean, and a lot of that was like you said, the larger than life aspect. I don't really see many characters in wrestling nowadays. Do you?
I can see Roman Reigns. Roman Reigns is another guy who I think would fit in back then because damn well if Roman Reigns was wrestling back then, they would have put him with his dad, Alpha. And they would have made him like a Samoan. They would have dressed him like a Samoan wrestler.
See, the best thing Roman Reigns did for his career is become the leader of the tribal chief.
Yep.
That is the best thing he did for his career because he was getting so stale as John Cena number 2.
Michael said, "Oh, that's an awesome story, Kev. I've heard that too." JB says Roman sucks. But hey, to be fair, JB, you did do a spear in your match. So if you're going to say Roman sucks, I'm just saying.
Yeah, but JB is a body star, and that spear was 10 times better than Roman's spear. So,
of course. Now, getting back to what I'm going to ask the crowd this in here in the comment section. Now, Superstar Xavier asked me to be a part of the Body Stars. Should I be a part of the Body Stars or not? I'm going to leave that comment out there because, I mean, you got the big guy JB, but I think if you get a technical beast.
Yeah, but look at the NWO. They had for a while there. They had both the Big Show and Nash. So, I mean, I'm gonna need all the big guns I can get to defeat the outright liars anyway.
And I can guarantee you the one thing I want to do, and I told Mel this, one thing I would love to do, and this would bring in a lot of viewers inside the wrestling show. If I came on there and body slammed Nate in that ring or suplexed him, I guarantee you people are going to be like,
I'll tell you what, if you come down and if you can give Nate like a belly to back suplex, I'll pop.
I have to probably do it the Scott Steiner way. Obviously, I'd have to like spin them and then do it because I don't think I can do the Kurt Angle and then go like that over my head with him. But
I would definitely pop for that.
I definitely would use some old school moves on him. He's got a head that I would like to crush. Just put my big old hand on there and just crush his head. And I was cheering JB on when I watched the match. I was like, kick his ass, JB, get him.
That's a hell of a performance. JB is an incredible performer. There's a lot that I see in JB that I saw in like other wrestlers when I was coming up in the late 90s. Because
by the way, JB, I need to get you on here so I can do an interview with you too. So
yeah, JB knows a lot about like character work, which is very rare in the indies nowadays.
I noticed that when I was first watching the wrestling show, I was like, "This JB guy's got his character down." But when I saw that outfit that he had on with against Nate, I was like, "That is sweet." I was like, "That
ass, isn't it?"
I mean,
yeah, and that's the reason why a promoter, well, like back in the days of the territories, up until like recently, why a promoter would ask if you had gear, because if you looked like you were a wrestler, it's like looking like a star. You got to look like a star. You got to act like a star. You can't just look like somebody met you at Walgreens. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I remember that too. He said that JB said my wrestling knowledge isn't all that.
Yeah, he's downplaying it. JB is like,
I tell you what,
he knows a lot of shit.
I tell you what, JB, me and you, if I join the Body Stars, me and you need to get Nate up the top rope. Me and you need to come down with a superplex with Nate off the top of that.
What about a stack suplex? Like JB sits on your shoulders and then JB suplexes Nate as you guys all go back.
Now you're giving me ideas. I mean, I told him I wouldn't mind doing a cinematic match either. I mean, those are things I wouldn't mind doing as well. But
there's pros and cons because, like, I've obviously done cinematic, but I did most of my career live, so there are some benefits to the cinematic stuff. It's just somebody who's trained. Like, I guess it's all how you're trained. If you're trained nowadays to be accustomed to the cinematic stuff, it won't be so jarring.
Right.
But the first time I did a cinematic match, the best way I can describe it is it takes you out of the moment, and it's almost like somebody throws cold water on you. You're like, that shock of like, okay, now how do I get back into the rhythm of stuff?
JB said, let's hope the ring doesn't break.
Well, yeah, we can reinforce it.
I wouldn't want to piss Matt off on that. So Michael said, Superstar, you got to deal with McMichaels before you could deal with the outliers.
Yes. See, here's the thing. Like, my problem with McMichaels is he's infringing on my livelihood, on my gimmick, because McMichaels and Michaels are way too similar. That's the only problem I have with him. He's a great wrestler, and when you see a Xavier match, Superstar versus McMichaels, it's going to come out technical because he's a pretty technical wrestler and knows his shit. My problem with the outright liars is they're talking shit about me and my Body Stars. And Kev, in the world of professional wrestling, you don't let people talk shit about your friends. That's all I'm going to say about that. So, yes, I will deal with McMichael. That's more of a legal issue. My legal team's on that right now. So he has to agree to some of the stipulations of an upcoming match. But just wait, Kevin. I'll actually send these to you. I am going to do an exclusive interview, DX style, with Matt Jones.
Oh.
It's going to be filmed very shortly, and we're going to address some of these issues that they are claiming that they have with the Body Stars.
Well, I think they got a really unsafe work environment. Like you have a girl walking around with a baseball bat hitting people, and it's very unsafe work environments for people like you. And
that's not a gimmicked bat either.
Oh, I know that. I saw the hit. I was like, me and Mel both were like, damn, she connected.
Yeah, that's not a gimmicked baseball bat.
I could tell right off the bat. I was like, that is not a gimmick one. But I can tell you this much, though. The one thing I would tell anybody is why do you think, Xavier, that the indies still have that? They still go by the rules of the old school wrestling.
I think because it's like a social contract. It's accepted that if you go to an indie show, you're expecting to see something that you don't see on television. So you're expecting to see something a little bit more old school. That's my opinion of it. Going to the live matches, especially nowadays, I have way more fun than watching pay-per-views. You're right. There's a whole different feel to it. There's a whole different set of rules, but it's almost like college football. That's the best way I can describe it. Like you can tell in college football, these kids are playing still with their hearts, but they're also playing because they're hungry and they want to become a pro. It's the same with the indies. These guys still love.
They make that money. Yep.
Yep.
Speaking of which, there's one guy on AEW that I love a lot, and that's MJF. I love his mic work, and I feel like he could be the next Ric Flair. He really could be the next Ric Flair because he has that go away heat, and he always goes. He looks at the crowd, and he looks at somebody in the crowd, and he goes, "Why don't you shut up, fat boy?" I love that. I mean, because I remember during the Indies, I went to a couple of Indie shows with. Watching one of my friends wrestle.
Somebody asked me recently about, this is what I like about MJF, and I'll tell you the story so people can understand what I mean. I can do moonsaults. I can do frog splashes off the top rope. I choose not to because I don't have to. Because like MJF, now I'm not as good as MJF in some respects, but I'm good on the mic. If you're good on the mic, you do not have to do spears, power bombs, last rides. You know what I mean? You can get over with your mouth. Right. And that is what is awesome about MJF. The other good thing about MJF is he has his fucking family involved in the gimmick. Do you know how funny it is that his mom posts on Twitter, like, here's a picture of the last time I liked you, you asshole, and it's a picture of when he's a kid?
Yeah.
But no, MJF has that going for him. MJF, people give him shit because he doesn't either wrestle good matches or long matches, but MJF doesn't have to. He's one of their best guys on the mic. So he doesn't need to rely on a Young Bucks thing. Like Young Bucks interviews are like watching two girls play Truth or Dare when they talk on the microphone.
Yep. I mean, I do like the revival of the FTR. I like them as a tag team because they remind me of the old school.
FTR for the last 10 years has been my favorite tag team in professional wrestling.
Yep. Now, my mom was the same way. Like, we would watch wrestling back in the day. She would get into it, and she'd be like, especially if Hogan got jumped or hurt, she'd be like, don't hurt him. But then when I wrestled, she went to a show once, and she tried to get in the freaking ring, try to go after these guys. And I'm like, whoa. We're good. Don't do it. But I ended up taking one of her canes when she had her knee surgery. I took one of her canes and hit somebody with. I hit the wrestler with it. But it actually is. It is funny involving your family in it. It's actually pretty fun.
Oh yeah, I mean, and if it'll further the storyline, as long as it's not something that'll traumatize them, by all means, and they're all adults now. But I just think it's so funny that she'll post something like that, and then MJF will come back and say, "Oh, shut the fuck up, mom."
Well, I'll tell you this much: if WWE was to get their hands on MJF,
well, first of all, they'd wreck him. But if they'd let him be himself, then yes, I know where you're going with this.
Everybody tries to say him and the Miz are the same. No. I can see the similarities that people are talking about, but there's a totally different thing. The one thing about MJF is he reminds me of Ric Flair with that, promos where he'll look at somebody in the crowd and go, "Why don't you shut up, fat boy, before I steal your woman?" It's just that nice little heat thing, and I like that. But I'll tell you this though, the one thing about there is one thing that the wrestling show is missing, and I'm going to probably bring this up to Matt, or you can, or whatever, but I think the wrestling show is missing announcing. I wish, and I actually did announcing before with like some games and when I did some E-Fed stuff, I did announcing before. So I know how to do announcing. I almost want to tell Matt, like, hey, if you give me the show, I could put my voice on there and be like, oh my God.
Yeah, I don't know what, because it's all Matt's vision with the wrestling show. And yeah, I think, I don't know what to exactly say on it, because I'm in the same viewpoint as you, as I think anything can benefit from announcers, especially if you have the right announce team. You know what I mean? Like, of course, Gorilla and Bobby, probably the greatest broadcast team of all time.
Yeah.
I know sometimes they did have announcing, though. I take that when they did their live show, there was two guys announcing. They did have announcing on that live show from the Harmony Club. The shorter matches, I think you can get away with not having announcing. But yeah, that's a good question to ask him. I never thought to ask him that.
But JB said I've talked about it with Matt, but he said he would add another sound in the video, and when he loses sound clips sometimes. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, announcing is always like some of my favorites growing up were announcers. You know what I mean? Like Bobby, but I've always liked Bobby Heenan. Even when he was the Weasel, I loved Bobby the Brain Heenan.
A lot of people don't give this woman enough credit, but I used to like Sensational Sherry.
Dude, she was a worker's worker.
Yeah.
I mean, if she would have been, and I'm not saying this to be sexist. This is not meant to be sexist. It was just the sign of the times. But if she would have been born a man, she would have been a huge star.
I remember she ended up taking she took an atomic drop from Hogan.
Right. And, back in that day, the promoters were like, oh, yeah, there's no broads in broadcasting. So it's like she was unfortunately suffered from the prevalence in that era of not allowing women to have as much of the spotlight. But man, Sherry Martel, you can tell somebody's talented when she takes bumps better than some of like the main talent. You know what I mean?
She was one of a kind, definitely. But since we're probably going to wrap this up here soon, guys, I know it's been like 2 hours. There's so much about the Golden Era we can probably get into for like 4 to 5 hours. But
has it really been 2 hours already?
Yeah.
Jeez, Louise.
So
I say, Kev, I love doing these with you because it's like you said, it's like having a beer with a buddy. Like.
Yep. And what we're gonna do, guys, is sometime either next week or maybe 2 weeks from now. I talked to Matt about it. Matt says that his son's got some games next week or something like that. So we'll see what happens. But we're going to do the Attitude Era and the Monday Night Wars thing with Xavier and Matt Jones. And maybe we can find out. Maybe you guys can trash talk each other. I'm saying.
Well, I mean, I'm an old school professional. So unless he throws the first stone, I will talk about what we're contracted to talk about.
Right.
I can't guarantee that I'll bite my lip if he starts spouting some bullshit.
And Matt, if you want to be on my good side, you want me to join the Outliers, you might have to sweeten the deal a little bit.
It's going to actually be nice to hear Matt's take on it because Matt is younger than both of us.
Yeah.
And I want to know, like, because, you know, by the time the Attitude Era came around for both you and I, we had already been accustomed to the, you know, the Hogan era and then the new generation. So it would kind of be cool to hear somebody's take on it who actually their first introduction was the Attitude Era.
Yeah. Now, me and Matt have something in common. We both like the Hollywood Hogan coronation of Hogan. I thought that resurrected Hogan's career. But I will tell everybody this, and I'm going to tell everybody right now. I'll give you a little hint. I was more of a WCW guy back in the Monday Night Wars than I was a WWF guy.
This will be cool because I was a WWF guy during the Monday Night Wars.
Now, I did flip-flop, and I did watch both, and I used to have VHS tapes of both of them, and I would watch both of them. But I think it was because I was a Hogan guy. I was loyal, so I just followed where it went. So, I've been to more WCW shows than I have WWE. So,
what Josh and I used to do, because, you know, Nitro was 3 hours at that time.
Yeah.
So we'd watch the first hour of Nitro. Then we'd watch all of, you know, Raw. And then there was actually, Turner used to replay all of Nitro at midnight. So typically on a Monday night, we'd stay up till like midnight and watch the replay.
So Michael said, I wish I can get my buddy Mykeals to join that. I don't know if he would not talk shit to Superstar.
You know, everybody talks shit to Superstar when you're this beautiful, this talented. I mean, that just comes with the territory. But yeah, McMichaels would. I mean, I don't know how many people can you support on this thing, like on these live shows.
I can put I can have 6 people in here.
Oh wow.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the Attitude Era is probably, in my opinion, the most defining era of wrestling. Because I think the end of the Attitude Era is essentially when wrestling as we know it died. So it's a very important era of wrestling. You know what I mean?
And I think the one problem is some fans of AEW, like you being a fan of AEW, I respect that. Like Nate's a fan of AEW. I'm not against people not liking AEW. I hate the ones who don't like anything else but that. Like they're very mean and rude. Like I see some of those AEW fans on Twitter, and I'm like, God, y'all are rude. I mean, if someone doesn't like what you like, it's okay.
Right. And, you know, I've progressed beyond the point of liking a specific promotion because there's no promotion that really produces a solid product from beginning to end anymore. So I'm more of a fan of like specific wrestlers. And by and large, the guys I like the most currently are all in AEW.
Well, I'll tell you something else too, Michael. If you did bring McMichaels into this chat with us, he gets out of line with Superstar. I would knock his teeth so far down his throat, he had to stick his toothbrush up his ass to brush it.
Good. I'll have you at ringside when we have. I can't let the cat out of the bag yet. My attorneys are going to serve him with some paperwork. So
you're talking
I think it actually already aired.
I think what I actually told Mel this too. The one thing that I would bring if I did do something with the wrestling show is I have a Muay Thai boxing background. So for me, that is something that hasn't been seen on there yet. And
oh no.
And I don't want to punch anybody, but I mean, if I had to.
See, I'm at the stage of my career where I'm kind of passing the torch, and that's kind of like in regards to the wrestling show. That's why JB is a solid member of the Body Stars, because I can see him going pretty far in the indies.
JB's got a really great future, and I could tell that by the way he was doing stuff, and he was selling really good. He made Nate look really good.
Yeah, really dude, the selling is key, and it's like that Ricky Steamboat, Bill Dremel thing. Like if you can keep up that selling, it makes the match even more believable.
Now Mel's the kind of girl where she may not remember certain names of the moves, but when you do them, and when she does them, she does it so well, like outsells a lot of stuff. And I'm sitting there thinking, like, if she came on there, she would be like, people would be like, well, damn, like she knows how to sell her craft. So,
Well, this has been excellent, bro. Like this era or the era we've been talking about with wrestling, the golden era, is just like, I don't know. We talked about this off air. I just gravitate more and more and more to it because it's just like there's so much of it out there if you know where to look. And a lot of it's on YouTube, and the matches, they're just crisp. They're crisp matches, and there's nobody doing, rubber band flips off the rafters.
now I remember, and I'll talk about this in the Attitude Era. There was only one ECW show that came to Nashville back in '97. I went to, and ECW got banned for a while from that. After what all happened there, but also I will be unpackaging something next month because Superstar is sending me something, so I have to unpackage it in front of everybody. So this will be my answer. What this package will be my answer whether or not I join the Body Stars.
Excellent. I am looking forward to that.
Because even if I'm not there all the time, I can be like, hey, you know what? I still support Xavier.
Well, thank you, brother. I appreciate that. This coming Saturday actually we're going to be filming the Screw City Rumble, so I'll need all the support I can get.
I really wish I can come down there and just start throwing everybody out, and then like act like I eliminated myself so you can win it.
Well, I mean, all three of us Body Stars are going to be in it, so I hope it doesn't come down to us three.
Hey, the way I look at that is, as long as it stays in the family.
I've talked about this before. If I'm going to be going for the Galactic Championship in the wrestling show, and I shouldn't say if, but when I get the opportunity to wrestle for it and when I win it, it's going to be all of the Body Stars. The Body Stars are going to be the Galactic Champion, not just Xavier Mykeals.
You know what, Nate? If you were smart, you'd be throwing out some of that galactic money my way. You need some people.
I mean, and I've seen the amount of money that Nate the Effing Great spends at the strip club, and he does have a little extra to throw around, so he should use that in the right spots.
The wrestling show is in the chat. Screw City Rumble coming soon. So the next time that I do one of these, you're going to see Superstar Xavier Mykeals and Matt the Empire Jones in this chat, and we're going to talk about the Attitude Era, the Monday Night Wars, and the death of professional wrestling.
I'm really excited. Like I said, I love hearing input on people who got introduced to wrestling during that era. So this is going to be fun for me.
I got to show this off. I actually got this for Mel's mom. Got this for me for Christmas. It was the black Hulkamania shirt, and I saw it once on the Hogan Knows Best thing, and I just was like, I want a black one. Why not have a black one? So
No, it's badass. I wish I still had my Hulkamania shirt.
I still have a red one that was from TNA. I have a Hollywood one. I told Mel, I said, look, if I'm going to do my K-Dog or my KD thing, I need to have I need to put the Kev Mania, because I had a Kev Mania one back and But I will say this, though. It's been great to talk about it. And any of you guys in the comment section later, if you see this video, if you've liked the Golden Era, tell us some of your stories. Tell us what you think about it. I know one guy on here who subbed to me hates Vince McMahon for getting rid of the territories. He's told me that on numerous occasions. We all agree Vince McMahon's an asshole. We all agree with that.
Yep.
But before we go, I'm gonna get your take on this. Do you think wrestling should have an off season, like NFL or baseball?
That's an interesting concept. Like, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know how they'd execute it. If they executed it correctly, it could do wonders for the business. You know what I mean? Where if it ended at WrestleMania and started at Royal Rumble, and you kind of did the year backwards, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
You know, you had a 3-month off period between like the end of WrestleMania and the beginning of the Royal Rumble, and then the next 6 months was just the build from Rumble to WrestleMania. I think that would be perfect. But then it's like you'd have to do it the right way, because I don't know, a lot of that stuff they're contracted for weekly episodic television. So in those 3 months, I don't, unless you do your undercard for 3 months, you know what I mean? Like the job squad, you know, your B team.
Yep. I told somebody one time I think they should, at WrestleMania, they should end their season and then start back up around July building for SummerSlam. And
Yeah, I think WrestleMania is the perfect time to end it, because even when I was hardcore into watching WWE product, my favorite time of year was between the Rumble and WrestleMania. You know what I mean?
mm-hmm. And also, too, I forgot to talk about this, but the WrestleMania 2, I actually like the concept they did where some of WrestleMania was in Los Angeles, some was in Chicago, and some was in New York. I thought that was a really cool concept.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, from what I gather, listening to Bruce Pritchard's podcast, is it was such a clusterfuck for Vince McMahon and everybody that they essentially said never again. It was successful for him, for the fans and, you know, alike, but apparently it was just such a headache that they'll never ever do it again.
And Bruce Pritchard does a really good Vince McMahon impersonation.
Oh, he does. And he does a great Macho Man, because him and Macho Man were like close friends.
He also does a good one of who else does he do really good with? I forgot his name at the top of my head here, but he Bruce Pritchard does some really Dusty Rhodes. He does a really good Dusty Rhodes impersonation.
Yeah. Yeah, this has been great, my friend, and we'll keep everybody apprised via our social media outlets when we'll have the third part of the Attitude Era discussion, correct?
Right. Also, too, I'm gonna let everybody know that watch the Screw City Rumble. It's coming soon on the wrestling show. I'm gonna actually feature their channel on my channel now, so people can just go straight to there. And good luck for the Rumble. And I hope one of you guys actually wins it. As a matter of fact, I kind of hope that Xavier wins the match, but you know.
Well, there'll be a lot that when I become Galactic Champion, that the Body Stars are going to do to make that title the most valuable title in independent wrestling.
And it's going to have the Freebird rules, right?
Yep. So when JB wrestles, he'll have the belt. When Courtney wrestles, she'll have the belt, because, you know, the Body Stars are a family. We look after each other here at the Body Star Ranch. So, and that's where I'm coming to you now from. This is from my office. I don't. JB and Courtney are in separate wings, so I thank them for watching from separate wings of the compound.
Absolutely. And Courtney's insane too.
You guys are going to be surprised when Courtney is on her game in this Rumble and she loses her temper. I don't want to be on the receiving end of that.
No. But I think we should see an insane Courtney hardcore match with Casey. I think that would be.
I don't know if I could pick a winner in that, because, you know, Crazy Casey doesn't feel any pain.
Nope.
I've seen that firsthand. She doesn't. Casey does not feel any pain, but Courtney's a scary motherfucker when she loses her temper. So that would be a great MMA style match.
Mm-hmm. Book it, Matt. Book it. But anyways, though, it's been good, though. Thank you guys for in the comment section giving you your guys ideas. I want to appreciate Xavier for taking the time out and doing this again. And I hope we covered everything. I know there's so much with the 60s and 70s and 80s. There was so much to cover. So, I mean, but if there's something that we miss, let me know in the comment section.
Excellent. Always a pleasure being around you, Big Kev. And Mel.
Hi.
Good to see you too, girl.
Thank you. Good to hear you guys talk tonight.
By the way, Xavier, I'm going to tell you this. We both turned 40 this year.
Yeah.
Does she even look like this? She would be 40?
Hell no.
But the crazy thing is, I keep telling him all the time, he turns 40 before me. So he gets to get the old fart slippers before I do. We're only
40,
a couple months.
40 is the new 25.
Yeah, well, he's only a couple months apart from me, so
And by the way, if you guys think
I'm gonna get back to the game, okay?
if they think Courtney's crazy and they think that Casey's crazy,
Yeah, you guys haven't met me yet. I'm pretty fucked up.
but who knows?
Well, I can't wait to meet you guys in real life.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. We'll definitely. Plus,
we're gonna try it sometime.
plus you're
this
from
year.
Wisconsin. You know, we got Wisconsin family, so it works for us.
And it's bitter here. It's like -5 right now. That's why I'm staying in the compound, because the second you step outside, your wiener looks like you're a 5-year-old boy again.
Mommy, where did it go?
Yeah.
But anyways, though, thanks for taking your time out, and I know you're a busy man. Good luck this Saturday. Good luck this weekend. I know you guys are filming it. Good luck, and which actually Superstar don't need luck, but and I get your lawyers to talk about the situation, because if you need me to knock Mykeals out, I'll knock Mykeals out.
I'll need all the help I can get. That guy is one hell of a technical wrestler, so I may need to take you up on that, brother.
I'll come down there and scare the living pants out of him. Anyways, though, thank you guys for watching this from Big Kev and Big Kev's World. Inside the Square Circle again with Xavier Mykeals. We were talking about the Golden Era, and soon we're going to be in there talking about the Attitude Era, and hopefully we'll get some more people in here, and we'll get to hear Matt's. I'm curious to hear his thing too about it. So,
Right, and people, make sure this stream is awesome, because I have dug through some of Big Kev's older stuff. So make sure you hit the like, the subscribe, turn on the notifications for him, because let's support Big Kev. This is a pretty goddamn good channel.
And plus, we got more funny TikTok things coming up for me, because I like making fun of people on TikTok. So, especially the girls.
Yep. Good old titty talk.
Titty talk. All right, guys. We'll see you in Xavier. We'll see you in a little bit, man.
All right.